Here we go. Okay, let's try to share the screen again. All right, Jeff, I will turn this over to you. Yes.
All right. So good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Because we have 250 participants globally that are participating today. So it's an exciting time. But I think good afternoon, good morning, and good evening are good. But I should really say howdy. Howdy. Right? Welcome to Texas A&M. So first, I want to thank the Institute for, I'm sorry.
I'd like to see you.
Okay. First, I want to thank the Institute for Advancing Health Through Agriculture, the NSF Center for Environmental Sustainability through Insect Farming for sponsoring this event. I definitely want to thank all of the speakers for your valuable time and perspectives on an industry that is young, but growing very fast and has massive potential for diversification that could lead to creating jobs, growing economies, and protecting the planet. We're really excited to have you. And we look forward to having your input as participants in the audience, but also as speakers. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Cheryl for housekeeping.
Thank you so much. I'm Cheryl Pryor with the Center for Environmental Sustainability through Insect Farming, which is hard to say without stopping to take a breath. I really appreciate everybody being here. I know we had around 200 people signed up to join us online. They may not all be able to join us right now based on wherever they are in the world, but we will issue a recording after the symposium. We have a full schedule and we're getting a little bit of a late start thanks to some technical issues, as you know, always tends to happen. During this meeting, we are using a microphone in the room. So everybody in the room got to hear me tell them, keep the chit chat down so that everybody who's watching remotely doesn't hear all of us and only hears our speakers. When we get to the panel with the questions and answers at the end, we will take questions through the webinar. We'll also have this little owl device. And again, the owl picks up everyone. So if you're chit chatting, then you'll be on camera too. For those of you who are here in person, and by the way, I think we have around 70 people in the room, which is amazing. We have a reception following this close to where folks registered, and you should have some drink tickets in the back of your name badge. Each of those tickets is good to be redeemed for a drink, and we'll have some things to snack on. And in terms of getting the recording, if you don't already follow us on LinkedIn, look for CEIF, the Center for Environmental Sustainability through Insect Farming on LinkedIn. We'll post information about finding the recording there. We plan to post it to our website and it'll be available through a YouTube channel. And of course, if this whets your appetite to learn more about CEIF and the research that we're doing, if you might be interested in talking about membership, let us know after the fact. We're always happy to talk about CEIF and membership. And with that, I'm going to get rid of, nope, I'll move this one. Our first speaker is David Zilberman from the University of California, Berkeley. He holds the Robinson Chair in Agriculture and Resource Economics Department at the University of California at Berkeley. He's the recipient of the 2019 Wolf Prize in Agriculture and was elected a member of the U.S. National Academy of Science in 2019. He is a Hagler Fellow at Texas A&M University. And if you have the program that we sent about this event, you can find a little bit more information about him there. So David, I will help you set up your presentation.
Good.
Give me just a moment. And if you stand here, the camera will see you.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, thanks. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm an agricultural economist who's working on issues of entrepreneurship and supply chain and environment. And the last several years, I've been working on developing sustainable supply chain, how to design it, and working from small enterprise to big corporations. And I really believe that we are in an era of big change, and I'll speak about two important concepts, bioeconomy and circularity, that people are really caring about. And I think that, as I will argue later, that the black soldier fly and the way you process it is almost a poster child of the bioeconomy. So I'll first speak about some of the basic challenges that we have, give some background. How can I see this industry from a larger perspective? And then I will go down to look at some of the detail. What do we learn from the supply chain of other industries, and what does that mean for here? So if I look at it, there are three major challenges for humanities. First is food security. We will have we need to increase our food by 70%. People get more money. There are more people. People will eat, would like to have more protein. Where will it come from? Then you have the loss of biodiversity. We lose biodiversity like crazy. And for example, we now have a new industry of aquaculture, which is great. The only thing at aquaculture is using fish meal. So a lot of the fish are disappearing. Again, we need protein. And then you have the big one, which is climate change. And climate change will lead to loss of land, a lot of migration. There are many other issues. I can give a talk on climate change. But the key element in climate change, we need to increase our supply of food and resources with less land, less resources, more efficiency. And then we have problem of waste in general. So how do we solve them? So the solution is to move from a non-renewable economy to a renewable economy. And generally, we can speak about two types of renewable resources. You have wind and sun, which are great. But then you have the living creatures. And these are plants, animals, and we need to increase the range of living creatures that we harvest. And insect is one good example. Now we can speak about two types of systems that deal with living creatures, like harvesting, like hunting or fishing, or husbandry, where you basically start from breeding, raising, and harvesting. And to me, the insect is one example of all this stuff, and they're a key element of the bioeconomy. Now, what is the bioeconomy? Now, the bioeconomy has three elements. The use of natural resources, the use of natural resources to produce food, fuel, and chemical. Eventually, even though I'm in Texas, you move away from fuel and fossil fuel, and you start using biology. It must happen. The issue is the issue of waste. The other thing is to use modern technologies, biotech, nano, information, etc. We have a lot of technologies, and unfortunately, we don't take advantage of them. If you look at my career is, to some extent, is trying to understand why we don't take advantage of all the new development that we have. We discover the genome, we discover a lot of biotechnology that is key in medicine. We save ourselves from the pandemic because of biotechnology, but still we don't use a lot of technologies that are biological to enhance our food system. And one of the major implications of the bioeconomy is that agriculture is more than food. People worry that we won't be able to feed the world. I think not only if we use our technology, not only it will be able to use it to feed the world, but if we are smart, we'll be able to produce a lot of chemical, a lot of protein, a lot of other material using biological systems. So if the 20th century was the century of the physics, the 21st century will be the century of the biology, and we need to be very daring and to move to a renewable economy, taking advantage of technology. Now, I say it because it's not obvious. There are a lot of people that are against it. Some people speak about something called agroecology. Some people are opposed modern biotechnology. I don't believe that we can deal with climate change unless we use all the tools that we have. Obama has to think all of the above. And when it comes to save the planet, all of the above is important. Now, there is the bioeconomy is not a new concept. There was an old bioeconomy. We started with the bioeconomy. Horses, that was the main source of transportation. Wine, bread. This is the old bioeconomy. Now we have new systems that we can move to developing new type of product, but it's that we learn certain things from the old bioeconomy. One is that prohibition don't work. Excessive regulation don't work. See what happened with the prohibition. The other thing is that the importance of circularity. Generally, what happens is that when things die, they cause some problem. You cannot throw them away. So we need to move to a system that we reuse type of stuff. Traditional systems are linear because we don't have penalty on pollution. We don't pay attention to pollution. Now we cannot afford this luxury. Residue can be reused. And a lot of time, reuse of residue is a big challenge. And if we can find technologies that we use residue to produce value added, this is incredibly important. And we need to develop incentive because the gain is both that we get rid of waste and at the same time that you use new product. Now, the thing that happen is that we start, traditional systems are linear because we have a lot of resources. As scarcity increase, the luxury of linear system become too expensive and you need to move to circular system. Now, if I look at the black soldier fly, to some extent, it's a very valuable product. I'm not a biologist and you know it better than me. So in principle, you have the larvae and the larvae is a source of protein and a source of circularity, and it can address a lot of problems. It can address a lot of waste problems. It can address a lot of protein problems. For example, the issue of fish meal, the issue of dog food, the issue of feeding livestock. There are so many opportunities. And the important thing about it, that there are so much waste in this world that we can solve a lot of problems. So I try to look at the basic numbers. We can basically, with... to massage a little bit.
We're having trouble with people seeing these online. Can we break for a second?
Okay.
Mackenzie, is Mackenzie still here? Are people able to see online yet?
When you shared it, you shared only that one file and not the whole screen. So when you change files, it's not sharing it.
Well, let me just try this for a second.
So if you choose the screen, the desktop one, it should share, no.
The top one.
Desktop one, upper left. If you share that.
I'm sorry.
you
Oh,
share this,
This,
yeah, it should share anything you show.
Thank you. Thanks, Karen.
Sorry.
Now, if you show the slides. There we go.
yes, okay.
Okay, we're
Thank
doing
you.
good. Okay.
And we're having some trouble hearing in the back. I
Okay.
don't know if you can speak more loudly.
Okay,
We're
okay.
trying to get a microphone.
Okay. I also my accent, and to be honest, sometimes I don't understand myself. Okay, no problem. Anyhow. Good. I never knew that computer respond to massage, but anyhow. So, as I said before, so if you look at the black soldier fly, it can solve a lot of problems. It can produce protein, and generally speaking, we produce a lot of calories in the world. Actually, the #1 food problem become obesity rather than malnourishment, but we don't produce a lot of protein. And after the pandemic, every person in the world has a dog. And in China, dogs move from food to pets. So there is a lot of demand for pet food, and there is a lot of demand for other type of protein. So to some extent, this is a huge opportunity. Now, as I gave you the numbers, even 10% of the waste, if you use a black soldier fly, 10% of the waste, we can produce almost all the protein that we need. So to some, and we can produce a lot of fertilizer. So we don't, everyone, a lot of time, people come with a new technology which sounds great in the lab, but it's not scalable. This thing is scalable, and that's the reason that I'm so excited about it. But what will matter? #1, basic knowledge. We need to know about it. We need to understand how to increase productivity, how to make it uniform, how to process the larva, how to increase capacity, how to develop new products. I think we are in infancy. So there is a huge opportunity for research. The other thing is the price, the market forces. What will be the prices of input? What will be the price of alternative product? Now, if we look at waste product, we need to have the industry. Waste management now is not only moving stuff from the dump, but waste management will move waste from source A to companies that have black soldier fly. Ideally, the dump area in the world, waste disposal area will be, instead of every area that you bury stuff, will be factories that produce a lot of raw material for other things. Then we need incentive support for R&D, as well as incentive against pollution, penalties on pollution that will make people more likely to give waste material. And then the biggest challenge that we have, which is regulation. To me, what I really worry about is that when it comes down to it, I'm an environmental, I'm a member of the National Academy in the environment, but I worry about environmentalists because a lot of times they will worry about all the negative effects, and it will be like GMOs, that you have something with huge potential, but no one is using it. So to me, we really have to make sure that all the tests are done and we have good regulation, but the regulation should be pushed by the extremists. We really, I'm radical middle, not extreme right or extreme left. We really have a challenge here to save the planet. And the only thing is if you have sound regulation. What does regulation mean? Can you use food residues? Can you use food that people used before or not? If we have waste food, you speak about a big industry. If you don't have, if you cannot use food waste, but only food that hasn't been used, it's a small industry. Can you use animal waste? For what purposes? This is a big issue for research. But if we can use animal waste, it will be great. Can we use a lot of other type of organic waste? To me, the key is to increase the feedstock for this industry and not to worry about what happened. Because if we don't do it, things will be worse. If we do it, we can solve a lot of problems. Basically, you have to look at it, the trade-off between saving the fish and basically and protecting against some unknown risks. So to some extent, this is the key element. Now, what we learned from the past is that generally speaking, excessive regulation kill industry. Generally speaking, if you're an investor, and I work with investors, they hear the word regulation, they run away. They are really afraid. The ability to increase this industry will be limited if we have uncertainty about regulation, and if we have tough regulation that are not based on science. So we really have to have science-based regulation, taking into account the risk, but not exaggerating them. Now, the next thing is the issue of how to design supply chain. When you have a new industry, you have to think about supply chain and design. So you have three stages: breeding, rearing of the larvae, and production. In the beginning, you expect a lot of companies that will be vertically integrated. They do everything. But that's not the way the world works. Eventually, you may expect things that will operate like the poultry sector. That you have some companies that provide you the input, some companies that basically provide you the eggs, other companies that produce the larvae, and then someone that takes the processed larvae and distribute it. Now, you may have a company that will do two things, like I don't know, Tyson. They provide genetic material and they sell the chicken, or you will have breakdown among companies that do different things. But the creativity in identifying market niche and in identifying new sources of supply make this industry grow. In some area, you may have some very interesting situation that you will have, let's say, a dairy that have a lot of waste that will produce a lot of material to produce larvae that may be used by some other agricultural activity. To some extent, agriculture can, in many ways, can recirculate a lot of the material that it can be produced. You can also find that in some areas there will be a lot of export of some of the protein to countries like Taiwan or China that produce aquaculture in order to replace fish meal. A lot of this stuff depends on the design of supply chain. But to me, we will evolve, we need to understand all the options, and regulation and policy will affect the economics of the industry, the supply chain of the industry, and its future. So altogether, if as I said before, a lot depend on regulation, a lot depend on education of regulation. From the beginning, we have to work with everyone, from the meat sector to the livestock sector to the environmental group to policymakers to basically show them the potential of this industry. I start to look at the number. We speak about the industry that can be in the billion and can solve a lot of problems. So if I conclude, we speak about industry with immense material. 300 million is basically small change compared to the potential. And a lot depend on investment in research and development of sound regulation, and also educating the public about the potential of this product. I think that to me, the key challenge that we have, in addition to regulation, R&D, is to generate awareness about how this industry can solve some really critical problems. And I think that I'm really thankful to see that there are so many people that are interested in it because the potential is huge. Thank you.
Thank you, David. We'll hold questions until the end for the panel. I was so focused on welcoming you, I forgot to even introduce myself. My name is Jeff Tomberlin. I'm the director for the NSF Center. So I needed to say that. And secondly, I really need to recognize Ashley Ferris for helping so much with organizing the symposium as well. So thank you, Ashley.
Go ahead.
So it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Patrick Stover. He is the director of the Institute for Advancing Health Through Agriculture here at Texas A&M AgriLife Research. He's internationally known for his research in biochemistry, agriculture, and nutrition, where he's focused on the biochemical, genetic, and epigenetic mechanisms that underlie the relationships between nutrition, food fortification, and human pathologies. He's also a member of the National Academy of Sciences and is a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Sciences. Dr. Stover, thank you for being here today.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you for being here, and thank you, Dr. Tomberlin, for the invitation. So I am going to give you an overview of this institute, which really is about enhancing the purpose of food, sort of where trends are going in terms of how science is hitting society. Put some of the insect work here in context at the end, but also hope that you'll be able to engage with some of the activities we're doing that I described. So I'm going to be pacing through these pretty quickly, but hopefully you'll be able to track along. Those are just my disclosures. The food system we have today really came out of the post-World War II era, really the Depression and the post-World War II era, where there was a significant amount of hunger. And during that time, then the war came. This was during the Depression. The war came and there was a food shortage because we had to send all the food over to the soldiers, the quality food over. So there was really a lot of effort to try to get individuals to become food sufficient themselves, the victory gardens and such, and people had a tight connection with agriculture. It's also a time during the war when we really began to learn about that connection between what people ate, their health and performance. There was a lot of research done at that time, and that's why a lot of the quality food went overseas to these soldiers. We also in that time had severe droughts that really affected our ability to grow food. And what that led to in the post-World War II era was this sense that food was a human right, that hunger was completely unacceptable in the United States and globally. And there were major initiatives to scale up agriculture such that hunger would be rare. And when it did exist, it was not because of lack of food production, but because of other issues. That's the food system we have today. It had an endpoint. It had an endpoint of hunger, and driven by technology and the Green Revolution with an economic system to affect hunger. That was the endpoint. But of course, now we have another problem. We have to grow more food. As was said, there are going to be another 2 billion people on this planet by the year 2050. That's where the growth is going to be, right there. We still have malnourished people. Again, it's not because we don't produce enough food. It's issues of access and other things. But we have another problem. Another food-related problem. We don't have hunger, but we have skyrocketing rates of metabolic disease because of the quality, if you will, of food that is eaten. That is the major driver of healthcare costs. Total costs are estimated about $4 trillion a year. Total cost of diet-related chronic disease. Nobody can afford these. This is an issue you can get Democrats and Republicans to work together on because nobody can afford the healthcare costs, and they're driven a lot by the food environment. And treating that diabetes alone has a higher budget than most of the federal agencies. This is just a map of where we are in terms of adult obesity. Obesity continues to increase, not only in prevalence, but also in the actual BMI of obese people continues to increase. And as you can see, it's also disproportionate, that it's most of the diabetes we have, I mean, diabetes and metabolic disease related to food is not shared equally, but it's in our underserved communities. This is where the healthcare costs are, and the healthcare costs are socialized, so it's everybody's problem, if you will. And it's beginning to affect life expectancy. Some of this is because of COVID, but those people who died in COVID were the ones who had metabolic disease. That was a major risk factor for that. And you see here major differences here in changes in life expectancy among, again, underrepresented and other groups, really begging the question, you know, we saw social unrest during the pandemic. This is a problem we really have to fix because you cannot have a stable society with this sort of disparity. But agriculture can also be the solution. This is the 2020 Ag Appropriation Bill, where there's specific language in there dictating or requesting from USDA to provide information back to Congress how agriculture can be used to lower healthcare costs.
Could you stand in front of the camera?
Oh, sure. How agriculture can be used to lower healthcare costs. I usually wander all over the place. So just to review, the historical expectations of our agriculture and food system has been to produce and overproduce because the endpoint was hunger, food, fiber, and fuel to drive the economy and eliminate hunger. Now we all know there are new expectations. That is that you have food for lifelong health, that you do it in a way that is environmentally sustainable and that agriculture is economically viable. Remember, hunger is the endpoint. You're going to have low margins because you want to make sure that food is affordable, accessible, etc. So how are we going to achieve those? We also have other issues. We are experiencing climate variability and climate change. And not only is temperature extremes and temperature changing, but variability where you can have flooding and drought, hot and cold in the same season. You can breed for hot, you can breed for cold, you can't breed for variability, which is a big issue. We also have economic costs. I told you about the $4 trillion in healthcare costs and total costs related to healthcare costs related to food. So there's a lot of emphasis to try to fix this economically. So that is, people want to determine what is the true cost of food when you internalize the externalities of the environment and healthcare costs. And so you have sin taxes, soda taxes, these sorts of things. Many economists who I know don't agree with this approach because your endpoint of the economic system is hunger. If you don't want that endpoint, change the endpoint and design then a new incentives, a new economic model, rather than trying to internalize externalities related to the endpoint of hunger. We also have a problem of economic viability for producers. We continue to lose precious land to more profitable sources, whether it be development or whether it be solar panels, etc. And so we're losing the resource we need to grow the food that we need, which is an economic problem. So this is the challenge. Can we feed the world without having diabetes on the cover, creating healthy people? The idea that food was directly related to health is not new. This is Jerry Fink, who during the Human Genome Project was head of the MIT Whitehead Institute. This is in 1998 at the Lasker Foundation talk he gave. But he said, I expect that in 2005, when the entire genome is scheduled to be done, the field of nutrition will be a completely different field, the most revolutionized field. He was, by the way, a yeast geneticist. And the reason is we will know a lot more. We will actually know something about nutrition, so you won't pick up one day something that says fat is good for you, fat's bad for you. We will know for some people it's good, some people it's bad. We will be able to know what people can metabolize and what people can't. We will have a new definition of what it means to be healthy. This was really the first time somebody connected the fact that there's tremendous heterogeneity in how people respond to food in terms of health outcomes. How you respond is different from somebody else. And that's the key when you change the endpoint from hunger to health, is now you have extreme heterogeneity in the population. So how do we deal with that? Am I going the wrong way? I'm sorry. Here we go. So this past year, it was just operationalized, but there was a piece by Francis Collins, the former director at NIH, who put out this paper, Precision Nutrition, the answer to what to eat to stay healthy, where they rolled out an NIH initiative in the Common Fund to begin to look at that connection between what people eat and these health outcomes to lower healthcare costs, where he specifically said in the diet disease relationship, one size does not fit all. And so this has been given the name precision nutrition. That is, generalized recommendations don't work. How do we begin to understand that connection between and classifying people, what they should eat so that they'll be healthy, recognizing that, again, one size does not fit all. So I was fortunate to be part of this committee at the National Academy back in 2017. So the National Academy of Sciences is charged with, by Congress, driving the dietary reference intakes. These lead to the DRIs that you see on the back of any food label, how much iron you need, how much B vitamins, this and that, and said, change the endpoint from hunger to health. That is deficiency, not having enough of something, to actually a health outcome, a chronic disease outcome. This is extraordinarily challenging for a number of reasons. Among those, if you have deficiency, right, which is hunger, if it's calories, you know, if you have a deficiency in calories, you're hungry. If you have a deficiency of iron, you have anemia, what they call hidden hunger or other nutrients. It's pretty simple because everybody in the population responds the same, at least 99%. When you set the endpoint to a chronic disease, there's many complex factors. People respond differently to food, people respond different to exercise, to sleep, all of these things. So it's multifactorial, it's very complex. Food's not the only component, and the interaction with food is heterogeneity. There's a lot of heterogeneity. So you have that heterogeneity, you have issues of penetrance and expressivity. So people express these at different rates with different severity. Few chronic diseases are single nutrients, so you have to consider major metabolic networks, how those connect to physiological networks in disease. You have to consider the immune and stress response systems. There are many people who don't react well, who have celiac disease, right? They don't react well to certain grains. Well, there's many more people who have a low-grade inflammatory response. They don't even know it. And that can lead to disease. So it's not only having deficiencies, but if this, now you bring in the immune system when you talk about disease. We also know there's other components of food that aren't essential for life, but can help improve health. And so now we could move from, you know, the 40 or so essential nutrients to many essential nutrients, or many nutrients that are involved in health. Is there a good biological premise for this? Absolutely. If you look, there are many genes that have adapted over time to changes in food. Food has been one of the major drivers, food and immunity, of variation in the human genome, because human populations emerged all over the world. Those that survived and expanded were ones who could adopt a local food and local pathogen environment. Example, this is amylase. If you look at human populations that adopted agriculture very early in their history, they actually expanded the amylase gene so they could then digest starch. If you look at people who are more closely in time related to hunter-gatherers, they have fewer copies of the amylase gene, and it affects their ability to metabolize starch. Same thing with the omega-3s and omega-6 fatty acids. There's a certain ratio of these that you find in seafood. When you switch to grains, you get a different ratio of the omega-3, omega-6 fatty acids, which led to selection where these genes here that actually synthesize these fatty acids endogenously, their expression changes to match the deficit of what they were getting. And again, you can track those through hunter-gatherers all the way to early adopters of agriculture when these genes adapted. You could talk about hemochromatosis, iron, it goes on and on. There are people have adapted to local food systems. That's why today we have that different connection between what people eat and their disease risk. It's really based on our evolutionary history. So where are we? If we talk about food for health, that health is going to be, that's going to be achieved at this intersection between what people experience in their food environment, and we've given that the term responsive agriculture, to decisions that they make and knowledge they have about what foods they need to stay healthy. And this is the intersection. If we want to use agriculture as the solution to healthcare costs, we have to work on both of these ends of the spectrum. And that's what we've done at Texas A&M. We have secured resources through both the state and the federal government to set up two entities to work across the entire ag value chain, to work on the production side, to improve the quality, not only quantity, but quality of what we produce in terms of the health outcome. Consumers, to help them understand the connection between food and health and the science that we need to make that connection in their decisions. And then we also created an evidence center to do systematic reviews across agriculture and food related to environmental, economic, and human health outcomes, that when any decision maker has a question about a new policy or a new practice or whatever, we can give the definitive state of the science. These are common in the field of medicine. They don't exist in agriculture and food. We haven't even announced this yet, and we have contracts from FAO, from WHO, from the federal government. So we're very excited about both of those, but these are the three audiences we need. We need to work across the entire spectrum of actors and players in ag value chain to achieve food for health. So I want to talk about an initiative we have in responsive agriculture right now, and that's really working on what the food environment is. And as you know, this is a complex system. We need to harmonize the connection between food, people, environment, and economics. They all have to work together if we are going to be able to use food to lower healthcare costs. We usually consider these in isolation. We have to look at how these complex systems interact, recognizing, and Dr. Zilberman talked about this, with technology, we can make the food system anything we want it to be. We have CRISPR, we have all of these technologies, we have fortification, we can make whatever we want. What do we want it to be, and do we have the will to do that? And what science do we need to continue to develop to do that? So we've termed this term responsive agriculture, which we say is an agriculture system and food environment that supports health through nutrition while ensuring the system is economically robust and environmentally sustainable for future generations. This is different from the One Health concept. We have prioritized. We've said the food system should be about health. Once we figure out what that is and all the biodiversity that we need to make sure that people who respond heterogeneously to food, that everybody is accommodated, identify that, and then how do we do it in a way that supports the environment and the economy? But there has to be a priority here if you're going to use agriculture to solve healthcare costs. You have to consider the entire system. You have to look for opportunities throughout that system. And so to kick this off, we held with Chicago Council in November a one-day meeting where we convened all sorts of experts. We had the Undersecretary of the USDA, we had members of Congress and their staffers, we had representatives from commodity groups, everybody had a seat at the table. And we talked about how we could begin to actualize this idea of responsive agriculture. We had World Food Prize laureates, and this has led now to a second phase. This is an 18-month phase where we are convening 3 committees that to us represent the domains of responsive agriculture. One of them is asking the question, what are the priorities we need in our food system that supports lifelong health and reduces healthcare costs? What do we need to do? What are the barriers? What can we do now? Because we have the good science to do it. Where do we need research? What are the research priorities, and what are the barriers to being able to do this now? And some of the technology barriers were mentioned by Dr. Zilberman. This committee will work on how do we do this food system in a way, again, that supports, that is supported by a good economic model and a good environmental model in terms of how we produce that food. And then the third area is how do we make sure that we have nutrition equity? Again, healthcare costs, diet-related chronic diseases in the underserved community, that's where the problem is. How do we be sure that there is equal access to nutrition security for health? So we now last week had a press release. We are asking for experts from across the spectrum of stakeholders, from across the spectrum of the ag value chain to serve on these committees. We're getting a really good response. If any of you are interested, we'd love to have you join us with this. But we're doing this in concert with the Chicago Council. We're going to be publishing a series of papers and then policy recommendations. And our friends in Washington are very excited about receiving the recommendations that we have. And again, this is a full collaboration with the USDA. There were many opportunities, as was mentioned. This is the ag value chain. There were many opportunities to intervene. Each one of these bubbles is an opportunity for intervention. This is what we need to do, is look at where are the interventions we need to do to change that endpoint from hunger to health and do it in a way that's environmentally sustainable. This is our little logo here. You see chronic diseases on top, the priority. Once we identify that, how do we then feed back to make sure we achieve nutrition equity and something that is economically and environmentally sustainable? I just want to close that insects, of course, are critical. The protein gap was mentioned. The idea of a circular economy was mentioned. Insects are going to be one of the many ways that we achieve this goal of having a food system that is defined as responsive agriculture. And that's why we're really excited to support some of the work that Dr. Tomerlin is doing. We're big fans of this, and we hope that we have good representation on our committee process from this community, because it is going to be one of the many important solutions to meeting that protein gap. So again, we've done it before with Norman Borlaug and technology and tackling hunger. We need to do it again with this future, with these new outcomes. There's many challenges. I won't go through those, but there's going to be a lot of challenges to this in terms of what it means for the food supply and everything else. But I just want to thank all of you and my two co-directors here, Reagan Bailey and Rebecca Segan-Fowler. I always like to work with people who are smarter and nicer than me, and they both check both of those boxes. They are wonderful people to work with. So thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Jackson.
All right. Okay, it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Karen Woolley. She holds the W.T. Doherty Welch Chair in Chemistry here at Texas A&M University. She's also, besides her academic position, she is the co-founder and president of Sugar Plastics LLC and chief technology officer at Tasha Technologies Ltd. Her research interests include the synthesis and characterization of biodegradable polymers derived from natural products, unique macromolecular architectures, complex polymer assemblies, and well-defined nanostructured materials. But she has many accolades, including she's a member of the National Academy of Sciences, but one that I hold really proudly is that she's the 2021 Southeastern Conference Professor of the Year. And every Saturday when I was with my family watching football, I said, I know her because she was in a commercial. We saw her all the time. Karen, thank you so much for agreeing to present. Floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Well, those were a lot of words about chemistry. I'm going to try not to overload you with chemistry today, but I am a synthetic organic chemist. It's my absolute pleasure to be here, and I want to thank Jeff for providing this opportunity for me to talk about a pretty new project in my group that I'm super excited about. But I'm going to give you a background and a little bit of a history for how we got to where we are now and what we're working on. Over the last more than a decade, my lab has focused on taking natural products, small molecules, and using them as building blocks to make polymers. So we connect together a lot of small molecules, making polymer chains. Those can tangle up like spaghetti. They then, on a molecular level, create mechanical properties that one would associate with plastics. Okay, so these are basically highly functional, sophisticated plastic materials that are built from sugars or other natural building blocks. We're careful about the way we connect those small molecules together so that we can break them down either intentionally or naturally in the environment. And that's a keen interest, is being able to have those polymers or plastics break down and being concerned about what they break down to regenerate. And they're regenerating these natural building blocks that can be environmentally and biologically non-harmful and perhaps even beneficial. So that's the overall theme for research in my group. And the motivation for this interest came from wanting to make materials that could replace metals in orthopedic applications, allowing for breakdown naturally as the bones were able to heal, and replacing plastic materials that had been and are currently used, things like polylactide, which breaks down to lactic acid. That's a hydroxy acid that gives you sore muscles after you exercise. So, you know, it's not actually that pleasant to have large quantities of lactic acid building up. And we wanted to have alternative materials. I'll come into that in more detail in just a moment. But from the work over the last decade, it's also translated into new directions and new applications beyond biomedical applications, including things like soft plastic fishing lures in our company that we formed, and I have a financial conflict of interest with, which is called Sugar Plastics. And then also addressing the plastic pollution crisis that everyone's becoming more and more aware of through another startup company called Taysha Technologies. And I'll highlight some of the interconnections between those two companies. And then finally, I'll get to this exciting part that Jeff invited me for, which is the harvesting of these natural building blocks from black soldier flies to make those plastics that then again can break back down to regenerate, the natural building blocks that come from the flies. And I'll tell you my final circular economy dream in relation to what David had said earlier. Okay, we're going to start here with the motivation and tell you a little bit about some of the chemistry. Again, not spending too much time on it, but I want to give you some perspective. So again, we wanted to replace synthetic things like polylactide with something that would break down to not cause discomfort, not generating things like hydroxy acids. So when we looked into nature, we said, well, the structural material in animals is bone, but in plants, it's cellulose. And cellulose is a polymer of glucose. And so when you see that chemical structure up there, each one of the things in parentheses is a repeating unit, and it's repeated over and over and over again. That's the glucose repeat unit. And it's connected through what are called glycosidic linkages. So we used that as our inspiration or model material. And we said, what we need to do is replace those glycosidic linkages that are connecting each of the glucose building blocks with something that didn't require cellulase enzymes to break down, because humans don't have cellulase enzymes. We thought we wanted something that could just be hydrolyzed without having to have enzymatic action. So our target was an analog of cellulose, where we were just installing carbonyls, carbon-oxygen double bonds between each of those glucose repeat units to produce a more hydrolytically degradable material. We thought by making this analog having similar overall structure and architecture to cellulose, it might have the same kind of good mechanical properties. And upon hydrolysis, the degradation products would be glucose and carbon dioxide, so no hydroxy acid, no lactic acid, etc. And in contrast to polylactide, we also would be incorporating functionality. And so we thought that was interesting from a chemical perspective in tuning the properties of the materials. Okay, so that's the background. And what we did over the last more than a decade is took glucose from the center of the slide and turned it into a lot of different kinds of polymers. And those are all shown around the outside of the slide. That's actually not all of the polymers we've made. We've made many, many different versions to, again, tune the composition, structure, and properties of the materials from the molecular level up to the macroscopic world. Okay, and that's, again, taken us in other directions for applications. We've recognized that we can do things like make soft plastic fishing lures. We don't have to be targeting this for biomedical applications. We can also make plastics that can break down in the environment and avoid having to have active human intervention in a recycling process. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about sugar plastics and Taysha Technologies. Years ago, my husband, who likes to fish and fishes in our tank on our property, as I guess Texans call ponds that are home man-made. And he would often lose his fishing lure. And he said to me, he said, you know, you're making biomedical materials that undergo hydrolytic degradation. Well, maybe you didn't use the word hydrolytic, but break down. And he said, can't you make me some fishing lures? So when I lose them in the pond, then they're not just accumulating. And so I worked together with Ashley Yonke, who was a postdoc in my lab at the time, and she also is an avid angler. And we formed a team with Simca Felder and Bill Howe to put together a team that could undergo the National Science Foundation Innovation Corps process. And that's where I first met Jeff many years ago. So our initial target was we wanted to make what we were calling sugar hooks and worms. But I can tell you the teaching team in the NSF I-Corps hated that. They made us change the title. They took us in all kinds of different directions. It was a super painful process. We had to build out a business model canvas. We engaged in more than 100 customer discovery interviews. We traveled all around the US conducting those interviews. We made several prototypes. And way back in the summer of 2016, we said, okay, we're not ready to start a company. So we didn't form a company. Meanwhile, I continued as a faculty member at Texas A&M University, and our technology transfer office engaged in external communications with people who were interested in bioplastics. And one of those led to licensing the intellectual property to a new startup company called Taysha Technologies, which kind of blocked my interest in some sense, but actually we have a fantastic relationship. I serve as Chief Technology Officer for Taysha Technologies, again, conflict of interest warning. Taysha is sponsoring research here at Texas A&M to further develop technology so that it can be implemented commercially. Meanwhile, about the same time, Ashley and I went ahead and co-founded Sugar Plastics, and we've continued to pursue formation of prototypes and testing. You can see they have fantastic action if any of you are anglers. One of our issues is they weren't quite tough enough, so when the fish bite them, they can bite off chunks. At least they will digest in their GI tract, unlike common plastic materials. And we do have an agreement with Taysha that when Taysha is successful, then we will be able to sublicense from them for our soft plastic fishing lures and perhaps hooks and other sports equipment. Okay, so that's exciting in that sense of having this fantastic relationship academically and commercially and the translation potential. And I have to say, Ashley and I feel quite fortunate to be able to work with the team that was put together by Matthew Stone that involves both business experience and technology experience and translating technologies through startup companies. So that's ongoing. Some of the materials that we've been able to produce through the sponsored research agreement are just fabulous. We can slightly change the chemistry and go from the upper left, which is a transparent, semi-flexible material that you might imagine being used in plastic packaging. And with other just slight formulation changes, we can make these super elastic, stretchy materials that have completely different potential applications. We can also formulate them as microplastics for additives, et cetera. So because there's so much of a scope here, we're working with Carl McAfee of McAfee Consulting to evaluate through design of experiments and other processes what kinds of materials we should be making and what applications they might be useful for, and also partnering with other companies to develop those. Okay, so now I come to the part that you might be more interested in hearing about, which is the use of black soldier flies to make some of these plastic materials. So I've shown you this pseudo diagram where we take natural products, we build polymers with the idea that they can break back down to those natural building blocks. I mentioned our use of glucose that was modeled after cellulose. And cellulose, of course, we can get from things like sugarcane. Well, we can get other sugars from sugarcane, but we can get from trees, the cellulose and things. There's lots of other natural products that we've been working with in my lab here academically, amino acids, nucleic acids, polyphenolic compounds. All of those can be derived from various plant or animal sources. And we, for quite a long time, thought, well, this is really fantastic, until we realized something that was mentioned, I think, by Patrick and David, that one needs to be careful about not competing when we're going after renewable resources, not competing with food, fuel, and other important needs. And so when Jeff and I were talking, Jeff said, hey, we have these black soldier flies, and the larvae are this important food material, and then these adult flies are, their carcasses are accumulating, and it's basically a waste that we have to deal with. You know, what could you do with it? And thankfully, two fairly young PhD students, Cassidy and Hong Ming, became keen to investigate what we could do. And this work is led actually by Cassidy, together with Shauna, who's they're in the room over there on the side. And so the idea is that from these black soldier flies, we can access polysaccharides. We can break those down to carbohydrates or sugar building blocks, or we can use them as their polymers. We can harvest the proteins and break them down to amino acids. We can get DNA and RNA and use the nucleic acids, lipids and fatty acids, and other natural building blocks. So we can partition basic components out of these black soldier flies and make different kinds of plastics out of them. I want to tell you about the one project where we're developing these materials, and it's another passion of mine, and that is to address climate change, and Patrick had mentioned this, the flooding and the drought. We know that places that have experienced drought at certain times of the year also often experience flooding. And when Hurricane Harvey hit, I became keenly aware of the issue with this, what I'm calling excessive liquid water. So if we look at what ends up in the news reports about climate change, you'll see things like global warming, melting of the polar ice caps, rising of the sea levels, and NPR, which I listen to in the mornings on the way to work, has one ad that they run where they say, if you're making a pot of coffee in the morning, you're basically drinking dinosaur pee, because all the water we have is all the water we've ever had. And again, I'm a chemist. I know that chemical reactions can both consume water and also produce water. So we can make and unmake water at will. And in fact, that happens a lot. So as we burn hydrocarbons, what we produce on burning hydrocarbons is carbon dioxide and water. I apologize, it's a little bit bright in here and maybe a little small, but hydrocarbon burning gives carbon dioxide and water. If we shift away from hydrocarbons to hydrogen, we're still gonna produce water, right? So a lot of people are concerned about carbon capture, CO2 rising, and that contributing to climate change. A lot of people ignore the water, and water is also responsible for global warming. It's in clouds and things, it causes issues. And as liquid water, I don't want it flooding my house. So I think we need to think about how are we going to capture the water, and then how are we going to utilize it as we desire. So what we designed are hydrogel network materials, super absorbent hydrogels that can be super tough, be able to capture large quantities of water, store it, and then they can break down to release that water at a later time, allowing that water to be used, say, as a hydroponic material. And also as they break down, they can, say, produce sugars that can be used as nutrients to grow plants. So if we want to make them super tough, we have to think about the molecular architecture. And what we're doing is we're building the molecular architecture based on what's called a slide ring network structure. And then we're building large voids within the molecular frameworks on a more nano to microscopic scale by forming what are called polymer high internal phase emulsion materials. And all of these are constructed from glucose. Okay, so the idea is, again, that we can have the properties we want, and then they'll break back down to regenerate those natural building blocks. So one PhD student, Gina, who I just hooded her last Saturday, she just finished her PhD, worked on the slide ring network materials from glucose. But the story I'm going to tell you about is just a really brief one on work that Hong Ming has been doing to make these poly high internal phase emulsion materials from materials that Cassidy has isolated with Shauna from black soldier flies. Okay, so Hong Ming started by using commercially available chitosan to produce these polymer high internal phase emulsion systems. So chitosan is a polymer, not of glucose, but of aminoglucose, where the nitrogen sites along the backbone are acetylated, so they're kind of blocked. And sorry, that's chitin. And then when chitin is deacetylated, then it becomes what's called chitosan. So by doing some deacetylation, he opens up some of those reactive amino nitrogen sites. He can then install reactive carboxylic acid groups through a chemical modification. He then forms these emulsions and then adds an additive that can cross-link the system in place. So that's the chemistry that I'm not going to go into detail on. But what he's found is that if he just makes the gel, if he just cross-links the material without making the emulsion, that's the image on the upper left. If he emulsifies the material, cross-links it, and then swells it with water, that gives a greater degree of swelling. You can see that in the upper middle image. And depending on the way he makes the emulsion, the extent of emulsification controls the porosity. So again, opening up those voids, it also controls the extent to which the material can swell with water. Okay, so that was all done with the commercially available material. Bringing this full story together, then Cassidy isolated chitin from the black soldier flies that were provided from Jeff's lab. You can see in that image there, they're whiter and more pristine than chitin that we can buy commercially and that's obtained from shrimp. And then Hongming turned that into these high internal phase emulsion materials. And then you can see the swollen sample here at the bottom. And what he quantified was that they could take up 47 times their mass within 1 minute. So they have high capacity and they're also really fast. So we're super excited about moving these materials forward. I want to conclude with, again, my dream for how this circular economy is going to work. So we would harvest the building blocks from the black soldier flies, convert them into plastic materials, where those plastic materials could, say, address plastics pollution or be more sophisticated and undergo some things that I'm also interested in, which is on the nanoscale, making particles safe for drug delivery or environmental cleanup that can undergo transformations that are triggered. That's more detailed than you need to know about today. But overall, again, this circularity, what I would anticipate is that the black soldier flies could then eat the plastics and then regenerate new building blocks for new plastics. So that's what I think we're going to be working on over the next couple of years. I did want to give a quick plug because I think a lot of people in the room and online might be interested in the topic of synthetic food, based on, again, what Patrick was just discussing. And there is a webinar that's been organized by the Chemical Sciences Roundtable. That's a division of the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. And that will be happening on June 2nd. The QR code there you can take a shot of if you're interested, or you can just Google Chemical Sciences Roundtable NASEM and you'll get to the webpage, and you can subscribe to get information about events that are coming up in the future. Okay, finally, I'd just like to say thank you to the members of my group who contributed to the work that I presented today. Thanks to Jeff, and thanks to Tasha and Carl McAfee. All of this work was supported initially by the Welch Foundation through the Doherty Welch Chair in Chemistry that I hold, and it's been supported over the years by the National Science Foundation. So thank you so much for your attention. I look forward to the panel discussion later.
Thank you, everybody.
All right, our next presenter is Dr. Maria de Goy. She's an associate professor in animal science at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Her research program is on companion animal and comparative nutrition. She has 3 main overarching goals: analytical methods and animal models for evaluation of nutritional adequacy of novel ingredients, the effects of processing on pet food quality, nutritional value and safety, and the role of nutraceuticals in health and wellness of pets. She was the 2021 recipient of the Campus Distinguished Promotion Award at her university. She has a well-funded research program. She's published over 80 papers, and she's given over 40 invited presentations. Now it's 41.
I guess.
Yeah, so great having you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, good afternoon, I guess. Good morning, good night for whoever is watching us online. It's a pleasure to be here. It's my first time attending this conference, and I'm extremely excited to hear more about insects and what we can do for them in terms of sustainability, and specifically my area about nutrition. I think they already Jeff gave a great quick plug of what I do. My expertise is in companion animal and comparative nutrition. Most of the work that I do, it's focusing on the dog and the cat for their own health, but we also use other animal models that I'll be mentioning in here. One of them of interest today is the susceptomized rooster that we use as a way to analyze amino acid quality of several novel ingredients, being insect meal and different types of insects, one of them. We also have a white wet laboratory that allows us to do that investigation. And we're very fortunate of University of Illinois that we have facilities that also allows us to put diets together anywhere from animal feed, so mash diets, to pelleted, extruded, retorted, as well as baked and freeze-dried, which it is on the rise for the pet food industry. And all of those are kind of within the main research focus in our laboratory, as was mentioned here before. So I understand that many of you here may not be familiar with companion animal nutrition and may be wondering why a companion animal nutritionist is here among us today. So I think it is important for us to understand that in the pet population and the pet food industry, we see very similar challenges that we observed in the human population as well as in the human food system. So when we look at the pet population in US, we see the number of animals, especially dogs, increasing. It's about a 10% increase since 2016 with about 84 million dogs. We see that the number of households having dogs are increasing, and similar values, but not increasing as drastically for the cat population in the United States. When we look at the pet population between United States and Europe, that number quickly rise to 170 million dogs and 190 million cats. And that is not accounting for pets from emerging areas and in the world in continents such as Latin America, Asia Pacific, and Africa. So you may imagine that in parallel with the increase, something happening here. I didn't touch anything, I promise.
Let's just make sure we share the right screen.
Share the slides.
Hmm?
Reshare the slides.
We'll check with the speakers to make sure we can share their slides.
No.
What?
The Zoom.
Oh, with Zoom, yes, I'm trying. No, I think it has to be here and then here.
I think this is why I'll stay away from it.
So share that, and then we go here. Oh, share. Play from current.
Okay.
Mackenzie, can you see that? Okay, perfect. Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. I will stay away from this thing. So as you can see, to support this increase in pet population, there is also a strong and diversified pet industry that is growing simultaneously. When we look at here in terms of size, only in US, the pet industry is about $138 billion industry, where 50% of that market share is devoted to pet foods and treats, and other categories may be related to vet care and product sales, services and supply live animals and over-the-counter medicine. When we've narrowed in the pet food industry, some of the top trends that we see is premiumization, humanization, buying habits that are changing, functional ingredients, and sustainability. When you look at the top two here, premiumization and humanization, we see a shift in the value. So when you look at the pet food industry in the past, we used to consider the pet food industry as extremely sustainable because it was using primarily byproducts that were not going or competing directly with the pet food, with the human industry. However, now we see the desire of human grade, minimally processed foods that are very similar to what we eat. And so moving away from that byproduct, high throughput processing such as extrusion, and also interest in natural organic foods as well. In terms of buying habits, e-commerce is becoming more popular, especially among the younger pet owners or pet parents. And that has been something that has been accelerated with COVID. Functional ingredients, it's something that has been on the rise for a long time. It is also applicable perhaps for insects. So just providing nutrition, avoiding hunger, if you do a similarity or parallel with the human population, is not sufficient anymore. So what are some other benefits that nutrition can deliver to these animals in terms of health, wellness, and longevity? However, you can appreciate that this last item here, sustainability, does crash with the first two in here, because when you're moving towards human grade, minimally processed, and all those other ingredients that are in direct competition with the human food system, then sustainability becomes compromised in a way. And of course, not ignoring the pet owners, The human population is also forecasted to continue to increase, as was already mentioned today, and the demand for meat consumption is also continue to increase. Well, that is relevant for the pet industry because meat is, or protein, is the primary ingredient that makes pet owners decide on different diet formats based on ingredients and nutrient composition. So as humans are moving more towards meat consumption and that demand is increasing, we also see that increase in the pet population, and maybe even more exacerbated because there is this idea that these animals evolved as being carnivores, and therefore a high meat diet is something that is adequate and natural for these animals. Over the past several decades, here about 60 years, we can also appreciate that there has been a drift in terms of the proportion of animal and plant protein being used in human nutrition. And we also see a greater proportion of animal-based ingredients being used for dogs and cats, as well as an increase in protein being utilized. And we see the same here with humans, not only higher amounts of protein being ingested, but a greater proportion of meat in relation to plant proteins depicted in maroon and brown color in here. So that leads us to the concept of food sustainability that has already been approached this afternoon. But it is to produce enough food to maintain the human population, and I would add pet in here as well, without compromising the need of future generations. When we focus specifically on pet food sustainability, there are several factors that can affect that system. Is starting with ingredient selection, nutrient composition, and then protein sources are always the main target in this particular point, but processing. Are you using extrusion, those minimally processed methods that have a lower throughput, higher level of energy being used, and also different solutions in terms of packaging and transporting. A lot of these minimally processed foods, they have higher amount of water, so you're also carrying more water as you are transporting those products. So when we look at traditional at different protein sources being used in pet food, most of them were animal and byproduct based. A lot of them were rendered ingredients, so poultry byproduct meal, meat and bone meal, and all of those ingredients, if not used in animal feed or pet food, they become a source to be disposed in land fields. So those are extremely sustainable sources. In terms of plant derived, a lot of them were also co-products coming from the food industry or ethanol industry. So great examples would be soybean meal, corn gluten meal, and marine sources originally would be mostly fish meal, but there are also other sources now being utilized, and some of them actually include different cuts of fillet that directly compete with the human industry. And again, sustainability being a big issue, also because of fishery is also a non-sustainable system. So in more recent years, we have seen this drift towards novel protein sources. So a lot of them are considered exotic meats, and I'm just depicting a few of them in here. I'm sure you can come up with a few others that you have seen in the market. And there is also a higher interest in hydrolyzed proteins, and we have seen some of those hydrolyzed proteins also from an insect perspective. And then insects being an example of another protein source. Another one that we have analyzed in my lab is the Asian carp as being an invasive species and not being very appealing for human consumption, at least not in the United States, also being a potential use in pet food. In addition for them to being alternative sources or novel sources, they're also increasing in interest because protein can be a cause of allergen and cause food adverse reaction in humans and pets. And so a lot of those are being sought out as an alternative for those traditional proteins that some animals may not be able to consume. So when we look at about opportunities of insects or in different insect meals in pet food, we can see that there is a potential to decrease direct competition with the human food. I think there is currently now a better acceptance, at least in the United States, of using insects for pets than most of us. I would feed my golden retriever tulip insect before I would eat it. My cat for sure already eats on its own, so I don't even need to incentivize that. But also there is a lower requirement for resources, and that has already been explored in here as well. Is a natural food source for some animal species, and cats are primary examples of that. Blue shows me that is my domestic short hair. He always shows me how much he enjoys crickets when they show up in the summer. Insects also have a high feed conversion rate compared to other animals and a shorter life cycle, so allows for a much more sustainable production. However, all these opportunities that I just show here to you, none of them are related to nutrition, right? Those are opportunities of how you can use insects. But the reality is if you don't know what to do with insects and nutrition, all that effort that comes ahead of it kind of stays there, and there's not much of applicability, because the reality is insects and insect meals are not going to be used in wide scale in animal feed, and especially pet food, if we don't understand their nutritional value, their safety, and their functional capacity. So how does that process start? So usually starts with understanding the chemical composition of those ingredients. So every time that we see a novel ingredient in my laboratory, we're like, well, what is this for? What can we use that? Is that a protein source? Is that a fat source? Is that a combination of things? What might be some concerns? So for example, a funny story, when I came to US, I saw in the AKC, which is the American Kennel Club Association, a warning about avocado being toxic for dogs and cats. I said, wow, this is a problem of first world class because back home we have avocado trees everywhere. I don't know if I disclose that I'm from Brazil, so I may be the most southern in here, but they never died. At least I never heard of anybody dying or any dog dying of avocado toxicity. So I was highly interested on what that is. And it all boils down to person. Well, if you process, person goes away, and maybe animals can live happily after. So understanding those constraints are really important. So what might be some of the opportunities and challenges that need to be overcome? One of the things that we have to do is look at nutrient bioavailability and safety. So is there any concerns in terms of how much I can add, something that is intrinsic to those animals, to those ingredient sources that can be, or something that may be a diverse food reaction. So for example, we can eat chocolate, dogs and cats can't. And so, well, would that be something that could be a problem? And oftentimes we're using animal models such as the cystectomized rooster to understand some of that, is particularly in terms of protein quality. But once you have a pretty good understanding of what that ingredient is made of, what are maybe some of the potential and challenges, then you also need to understand processing. And processing can be of the ingredient itself, so how you harvest the insect and what may be the detriment or benefit in that harvesting method, but also has to do with once you assemble a diet and how you process, what might be some of the pros and cons of that. And 95 or 99%, I should say, of pet foods, they are processed. There is really no concept of raw pet food. I'm sorry for those of you that may feed raw. That would be a recall every day in this country if you were really feeding raw. So there is some kind of processing. I'm sorry to kind of burst the balloon if that is the case in here. And then once you have put those pieces together, then you really need to understand what is the effect on palatability. I always tell my students, you can make the best diet possible. And I even for us, probably our best diets in terms of health and nutrition probably are not the most palatable, right? Think about the French fries versus the raw broccoli. How many of us can eat a pound of raw broccoli, but how easily is to eat a pound of French fries? But then you also have to think about nutrient digestibility and tolerance in terms of GI health, immune system, and things like that. Oftentimes, we forget that different than in human nutrition that we focus on that my plate and all the compartments of carbs, protein, fiber, and fats. For dog and cat, we jumble all together and we provide a solution that has all of that. And so I always hear about, oh, we need more digestible pet food. And I said, how much we can. We know that the max is 100%. I hope that we cannot go above. Biologically, I don't know how we can do that. But also, if we do that, is that really a healthy outcome? What happens to the colon? And I don't think we wanted that. So we see some of those disconnects when we see some efforts in human nutrition versus pet food. And I think some of that is lack of education, of understanding how those numbers come about. And then ultimately functional properties. So what are some potential health benefits if I add insect meal, for example, and take away a different protein source? What would that mean to the animal? There's also other factors that need to be evaluated. For example, optimal inclusion level, ingredient availability. I'll show an example of a study that we have done in my laboratory that we really couldn't add too much of the ingredients. So instead of making extruded, we make retorted or wet pet food because ingredient availability is not quite there. Am I on time? Oh gosh.
We're running over.
Okay, so one of the things that we have to look at is the chemical composition, and you can see across different insects, there is quite a bit of variation in terms of just macronutrients. But we also know that there is a lot of different effects in terms of how that macronutrients change, life stage, diet, environment. And so here's just an example of a study that we have done looking at different ages of black soldier fly and understanding that depending on when you're harvesting these animals or these insects will be differences in the chemical composition. And that has huge effects in terms of formulation and how we can use those ingredients. So here's just to emphasize in some fluctuation, the beginning stages of larva, some of crude protein goes down and then comes back up, fat kind of the opposite direction, and some others have more of a linear trend. Similar effects we saw in amino acid composition, so fluctuation in those, and oftentimes related to the amount of fluctuation in crude protein as well. When we look at the standardized amino acid digestibility of that ingredient or those ingredients, we saw that for most of the essential amino acids or indispensable amino acids, there was no difference, but there were a few ones that we had differences. And here you can depict the main differences in terms of age. So then we'll be, well, if I'm producing those different ingredients, do I then decide when is best to harvest them? And based on this data, we believe that between 18 and 23 days seems to be most ideal. Then after that, we look at the use of black soldier fly meal at 10% inclusion, the whole larva at 5%, and black soldier fly oil at 1.5% in replacement of a control diet, which is a poultry-based. And we saw that palatability of those diets containing insects were higher, even though animals, the cats in this case, didn't really quite like the texture of the wet food because they are extremely used to our dry foods. When I look at digestibility, and here there is different macronutrients that we analyze, the main story in here is that when you just add the oil, there is really no negative effect compared to the control. But as you add either the whole or the meal, probably the presence of chitin decreases the digestibility of dry matter, organic matter, and crude protein, which usually a cutoff of 80 is what, or above, is what we expect. There are also some other studies looking at nutrient digestibility of black soldier fly meal and also effects on fecal score. And overall, you can see that depending on the diet, they can have actually better results compared to control. And that leads to the idea of how we're processing them. How are these ingredients changing? Oftentimes, we don't have enough information about those ingredients to understand why in some studies we're having negative effects and others were having positive. This particular study looked at use of black soldier fly at a 5% inclusion and looking at fecal scores. Many of you may be looking at me, why we're looking at fecal scores? Well, if you have a dog and if you need to pick it up after them, you know why I'm talking about fecal scores. So if you have loose stools from your animal and you need to pick it up with that diarrhea on the sidewalk, that is not a fun job. And so usually you want to between 2 and 3, and you can see all of the diets did not differ. Here we are also interested in skin barrier status. So if there is some kind of inflammation, or depending on the different fatty acids, we can actually have an improvement in skin condition and moisture. And you can see in here that there was no difference in transdermal water loss or moisture, and I will speed up. There's also some other insects that have been studied, and here is just a few examples. And this is a particular one that we did in my lab, looking at different sources of roaches and superworm. You can see that the composition of these ingredients can vary also quite a lot, and so it is important to understand. And also very few studies have characterized chitin, which I think is extremely important because we don't know enough about it. And there is this discussion about either a potential benefit or a potential hindrance in terms of nutrient utilization. One of the things that we learned is that there are very poor sources of taurine. Taurine is essential amino acid for cats. And so if you're developing dog, cat food, that is an important note to have. Different variability in fatty acid profile. Animals have essential fatty acids that are required. So understanding that is also important when assembling diets. Then we make different diets containing 4% of this insect proteins versus a control, which is always poultry meal. And in this case, we didn't see any negative effects in digestibility. And actually all of them, organic matter, crude protein, and fat, were all above, well above 80%, which is exactly what we like. In this particular study, we are also interested in fecal metabolites, such as short-chain fatty acids, acetate, propionate, and butyrate. Butyrate has been related to gut health, and we also analyze gut microbiota. And the bottom line is that we didn't see any differences among treatments, indicating that those insects were just as good as a poultry-based diet. Some of the challenges: consumer acceptance is certainly a major hurdle for human and pet food. Food safety, large-scale insect production. We have to look at about economical, social sustainability, and also cost. Legalities and regulations. So no ingredient can be added in pet food unless if it is approved for the intended use. And so right now we only have black soldier fly for dogs, but not for cats, and no other insect being approved. And there is also ethical concerns. Many of you may be like, what? But it is. We have received questions about how you're rearing, transporting, and harvesting. Sorry to have to speed up, but this is my contact information, and thank you again for your attention.
Great, thank you so much. We are going to take a short break. We will adjust the slides for the folks who are watching virtually, and we will resume in 9 minutes at 2:40 Central Time. Thank you.
It's good, Dave. That's really good. They all linked all of the topics. I'm glad you made it. Right. Good. All right. Welcome back. It's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker. Dr. Eric Bimbo is a professor and global scholar at Michigan State University with a joint appointment in the Department of Entomology and the Department of Osteopathic Medical Specialties. His research program has developed around basic and applied insect and microbial ecology with a history of studying disease in West Africa and more recent activities in building partnerships for food security in Uganda, Malawi, and Nigeria. The Bimbo Lab asked 3 basic questions. Is insect fitness influenced by the community of microbes living in or on them? What are the ecological interactions of insects with the microbial community associated with their habitat or food sources? And how can understanding insect microbe relationships be used to inform natural resources management, health, human health, and agriculture, including insects as food and feed? He's got an extensive publication list, over 170 peer-reviewed papers, 30 book chapters, and much more. It's a privilege to introduce our speaker, Dr. Eric Bimbo.
Well, thank you, Dr. Tomerlin, and thank you all. I've really enjoyed the presentation so far, and thank you, Cheryl, for organizing this, doing a fantastic job. I'm often, I'm more or less a spokesperson really for what's taken a village of getting black soldier fly up and running at almost at a village level in several places of Africa. And so I really need to acknowledge Dr. Jen Peckall, who's been the lead PI on USAID grants, has moved a lot of that forward, and a co-PI on some of the work that we've gotten started at Michigan State University. But also, and most importantly, we have two collaborators at McCurry University, Dr. Deborah Mullen and Patrick Vitro. And they have started the Center for Insect Research and Development that I'm going to kind of highlight near the end and highlight their successes and where they're going with all of this as well. So there's certainly a critical need, and I think you heard a lot about that this morning with some of the previous speakers, so I'm not going to really get into that much, but what I do want to talk about is where the industry might be in Africa. And I know certainly there's companies in Africa that are already producing BSF. There's smaller entities and entrepreneurs in Africa. But I want to talk more about, how our journey has been coming basically from USAID, university funding, and NGO involvement. And then ultimately, where will this industry go in a collective? We know that at least a few years ago, Africa was the next economic powerhouse on earth, but huge challenges really lie ahead. Major poverty, with 4.5 billion low-income people in these developing nations living on less than $9 a day, and consumption spending 2.7 billion on food and beverage. They also have their own challenges, right, of waste management and healthcare in many ways. This was one of our first BSF facilities in Malawi. You could see that they used local resources, but also suffered from lack of certain types of resources there too. And even in some of the other markets, it's what do they do with some of the organic matter waste that's available, but potentially not able to get it to certain areas where it can be used in maybe something like a BSF facility. Soil fertility issues also in Africa and Uganda in particular. For instance, 40% of Africa's soils experience moderate to severe degradation. And in Uganda, the depletion rate is estimated at 87 kilograms of nutrients per hectare. So they also have some significant environmental issues that they're going to have to deal with as we move forward. In several places, like in Malawi, Lilongwe, they do have aquaculture facilities, often tilapia, but they look at catfish and other species as well. And so there is a system to be able to grow more food, right, in different ways. But potentially the questions are asked, is it sustainable? And do the feed costs for developing aquaculture, for instance, are they at a level that can make profit for some of the local community members? So the big questions is, how do we improve food security in these areas of the more compromised nations, provide high quality diets, assess and maintain food safety that's sustainable, and begin to address scalability in these systems, and what's a meaningful scalability or meaningful scale in certain parts of Africa or Uganda as an example. I was first got involved at MSU with the Mopata Institute, which was originally the Agricultural Transformation Initiative. And so one of the big aspects was global cigarette demand was going down. So global tobacco demand was going down. And in Malawi, that was their number one part of their economy, right? And so this institution and the NGO was really responsible for trying to figure out new ways to improve and secure income streams, modify agriculture, and have different alternative agricultural practices to replace tobacco so that the people there could maintain their livelihoods and some kind of economic growth. And so we sat down and we would ask ourselves, but me from more of a BSF perspective, is how can we expand market opportunities in places like Malawi? What are the sources of protein within the market structure that already exist, and are they sustainable, right? So harvesting local fish from the variety of lakes there as well. Then improving the profitability for the current sources of protein, then diversifying that agriculture. And they do consume insects, right? They sell them at the market. We were there. I believe Jeff was there on this trip as well. And we got to taste both varieties of the locusts or the grasshoppers, I mean. But we also were at the market sitting right next to some of the other sources of protein that they harvest more seasonally rather than produce it as part of a farming adventure. So black soldier flies, I think you all know and understand pretty well, is a potential solution for some of this. And in Uganda, they are arguing that Africa has a strategic advantage. And one is that insect consumption, there's been a culture of it in Africa for a long time. So the acceptability of it is higher than it would be in other parts of the world. There's huge potential for high income and employment benefits. From recent, and I believe this came from Brenner et al., that BSF annual protein can be 2.6 billion, fertilizer of 19.4 billion, and create 15 million jobs over the continent when it's extrapolated out, if it becomes viable and real. And then the environmental benefits that we've talked about, less land, less water requirements, organic waste recycling, if we can get this started. So there's a lot of potential there, I think. And Dr. Deborah Emelin really has been spearheading this in Uganda and identifying the need and figuring out how to get this done in a sustainable way. So what are the key constraints for adoption of BSF in Africa? General lack of knowledge of the systems. So African farmers are reported, and our experiences in Uganda and in Malawi are that local peoples are very interested in BSF if they can learn how it's done. The other limitations, limited number of organizations and institutions for that knowledge transfer. So one of the things we're trying to do in Uganda is build that knowledge transfer, build that capacity so that local, very poor communities can begin to harness BSF and generate an economy and improve food security. And that gets to limited or absence of subsidies in many of these areas as well, compared to other areas of the world where there's lots of subsidies related to BSF. And then limited access to finance. What I've learned over the last, what has been 8-9 years now, so little investment up front goes so far in Africa, so far. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So yeah, there's limited access to finances, but I think we can be creative with not NGOs, with certain USAID types of approaches, but also universities and other entities can have a huge impact bringing BSF into the African markets. So for instance, Mabata, I went back and I looked at how they were funded. They were funded by USAID, the Feed the Future Innovation Lab for food security, policy, research capacity. Lots of money from the federal government, but also some nonprofits were contributing to funding as well. And the key part of all of this is often getting trusted relationships with local communities, local policymakers, and trying to identify areas where corruption may be limited, right, or non-existent, you would hope. But that is the key. It's getting local partners because they understand the culture, the situation much better than someone from the United States that goes over there and tries to tell them how to do their process or their system, or encourages them in certain ways, I should say. Our journey through this really started with Michigan State University. It's a land grant, just like Texas A&M. We've been moving towards an understanding of a world grant university. And so MSU is really trying to branch out. And so when I say AAP here, this is Michigan State University's African Alliance Partners, or Alliance for African Partnerships. And they gave us some seed money to engage and make these trips to Malawi and bring over Malawians to discuss how we could potentially bring BA to more recognized areas of research in there. And so it started early on in 2017 with a large group of collaborators, both in the US, but primarily in Malawi. Then that led to a postdoctoral training program for women from Africa. And I was Uh-oh. Dr. Deborah Amulin come to the Michigan State University. She was co-advised with Jennifer Peckall and myself to start looking into BSF. She was learning about BSF, and then COVID hit, of course, and she had to go back to Uganda. But there's a positive outcome of that, actually. Part of all these interactions then led to winning a USA Feed the Future Innovation Lab for Fish. It was led by Dr. Peckall and several economists, sociologists, and entomologists at Michigan State University.
Sorry, I'm trying to get the slides up correctly. Yeah. Thank you, Mackenzie.
But it was essentially the objectives are to integrate insects to fish farming systems, evaluate and survey the local peoples and the possibility of using different organic waste streams and microbiological assays for potential safety issues. And then doing like I said, the surveys to understand the social and cultural potential acceptance of, and then in modeling a lot of this in a socioeconomic context. And so it's not just entomology, it's not just economy, but it's bringing all of those disciplines together. But if you look back at that history of collaborations and funding, that postdoc that I said was truncated due to COVID actually led to ultimately this current USAID funding. But along the way, we had to have that first USAID grant, and Dr. Peckall needed to be a co-PI on this because you had to have evidence of previous funding. But I was also, again, then gave a little bit more discretionary funds from MSU to provide her additional money to start up her business, her research consortia there. And so a little bit went a huge way, and that led to the ability to gain more money from USAID. That's really going well. They just had a site visit from USAID, and National Academy of Sciences representative went, and they were very impressed with what they're doing in Uganda. And so I want to finish talking and highlighting what they've been doing there. That peer project is to assess the impact of COVID-19 on livestock feed protein, focusing on black soldier fly. So you map the actors along the value chain and assess the quality and safety of BSF larvae in these areas. Pilot and scale a cost of production model system, and then build capacity. And this is what I'm really excited about. Building the capacity at the local level, training farmers, training women and youth to bring BSF into the local markets and potentially regional markets as well. And what they've been doing is creating this one-stop knowledge center. And they have really made significant goals in Uganda to scale up their small system right now that's less than a hectare to 10 acres. And they want to be able to be training 1 million farmers by 2027. And I think with additional resources and enough movement from folks like you, NGOs, USAID, other foundations related to industry, they could probably do it. I've been so impressed with the work they've been doing. So the big catch here is building capacity locally, using local resources, having the person who knows the culture, knows how to approach people, knows where to get resources, right? Something we could have never advised them on, but Deborah and Patrick in Uganda have been able to do this. And so this is an example of their flyer to get the word out about what BSF is, what it can potentially do, and why it might be important for local farmers. The Center for Insect Research and Development that spun off of a lot of this previous funding. This is one-stop training center. It's extending training to all over the country. So she has a map that I've looked at. It's mobilizing and training farmers. They come to their place for both in-person training, but also there's online ways of training as well. And they're building these capacities to conduct research. And then they also conduct research to optimize and upscale some of the insect rearing technology. I went and visited in February and was amazed by the trial and error that went into this over the last few years after COVID and where they are right now. So it did take a lot of trial and error, trying to dig into the literature, but a lot of it wasn't in the literature or it wasn't going to work in Uganda. And so they've pivoted and made it work locally, which has been pretty impressive. This is the slide she sent me the other day about essentially where they see BSF farmers. Their farm is pretty small right now, has BSF breeding and production. They train, they look at the different components of the production. The CRD business incubation provides the inputs to local farmers as well in terms of kits. And they provide some assessments of investment plans. And then this is kind of cycling on itself in building and developing these online tools and services. So compared to some of the industrial scale work that you typically think about for BSF, they're doing pretty well. They were starting to buy a lot of their organic matter waste and saw that, you know, it wasn't a huge amount of money, but it's $200 a year or something like that. But they figure out a couple of other ways that I'll talk about. They make these kits for the farmers. So they have basically a starter pack that they have nice insignias and labels for them, which makes them much more trusted and reputable in the Uganda market. And they've been training an incredible number of farmers over the last year or so. And during my visit, I had one of the more profound experiences of my life as a scientist, as a researcher. And we visited their, not landfill, because this was more of a giant inverted landfill, probably 6 or 7 stories tall, maybe 2 to 3 kilometers in area. And what they decided to do was employ some of these women that would already be out there. And if you get on top of this, you drive on top of this giant mountain and you look out in the landscape and there's mountains of houses, nice houses and everything. And there are hundreds of people recycling, right? They're digging through the trash, they get stumped there. They are finding plastics and metals and other things and taking it to the right place. And there's women now that are being employed to not just do that for $3 an hour, but we're paying them $10 an hour and giving them PPE to do it as well, right? So that was all incubated in Uganda by Deborah and Patrick. You can kind of see way back there, that's another mountain. That's how large this is. Incredibly profound. How much waste is there that could be converted into something good. The car here is just for scale, but you can see they move it around with front loaders as well. And then you can see other people and birds coming in, but a lot of people picking through for their livelihood. And so this is what I'm getting at. Lots of food waste, lots of waste that could be recycled. Deborah's taking advantage of this. and really improving the lives of women. Often, most of these women are single mothers. They have kids down in the small village that acts as a giant recycling center with people going up into theirs. And so what she's been doing is really taking their income from $3 US per day to $10 per day, protecting them in the process and helping them feed their families. So the biggest questions I think are, where in Africa do the different scales fit and where are we going? And I think that's going to take years, but it's going to get there, and it's going to take a lot of partners. And so I just want to acknowledge the friends from Malawi. I won't get through all through their names, but they were multidisciplinary. We got moving there. We got stalled with COVID again, and we haven't been able to get back there and move that forward much, but they were really a major discussion group there that pushed that forward. Dr. Deborah Amun is a phenomenal researcher, phenomenal scientist, phenomenal entrepreneur. That's really a role model for women all over Uganda and probably the rest of Africa. But lots of funding sources that came through along this. So I thank you for your attention. Look forward to the panel.
Right. So our next presentation is a joint presentation. Mr. Chris Gallagher is the director at Mississippi State University. He's of the Access Program, a comprehensive transition program teaching college students with intellectual and developmental disabilities increase independence, career, academic, and social skills. He's also the director of the Disability Resource Center at Mississippi State University. He'll be joined up here by Miss Anita Lang. She's the assistant program director for Agri-Achieve. That's here at Texas A&M University. Prior to Agri-Achieve, she worked with as a service coordinator and program specialist too for the local Intellectual and Developmental Disability Authority for over 19 years. So what they'll do is they're going to split their presentation in 10 minutes each. Chris, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. You know you're in for a good presentation when the length of the title is about half the words of the total presentation. I don't know if I should apologize, but that's the start. So the title, The Win-Win of Disability Inclusive Research Teams, How Insects Food and Feed Research is Nourishing Students with Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. That's a lot, it's a mouthful, but what I want to say is the NSF has been trying to push for more inclusion of people with disabilities, students with disabilities in science research. That's easier said than done. As a side story, just this Monday, a faculty came to me and said, how do we get more students with disabilities in science research? She then explained that just a few years ago, prior to my arrival at Mississippi State, she had reached out to our office and asked our staff to reach out to students with disabilities that were in the science fields to indicate interest to her that they would like to be involved in research. So she started doing this and bringing students into research. Her department head came to her and said, why are you doing this? Why are you including these people? What if your co-PI doesn't want these students in this research? These types of students is what the phrase is that she said. And the co-PI was not a tenured faculty, she was. And so that was a stopper for her to some extent at that point. So we can take that statement as discriminatory or biased in some way, but I will tell you that that's one range of discrimination. But when I was approached by Dr. Heather Jordan to involve our students in this research, I had my own ableist kind of attitude. And I've worked in the field, working with people with intellectual disabilities for 20 plus years. And my thought initially was, how is this possible? How can students in these comprehensive transition programs with intellectual and developmental disabilities really participate in hard science research? And so what I want to say to all of us is that we probably all carry a level of bias, whether we're thinking about it or not, about whether somebody else can do something. And that's the thing that probably is going to stop researchers involving people with disabilities faster than anything. We think about the medical model of disabilities being an impairment of the person that needs to be fixed versus a social model, which is thinking about disability is really a problem of the environment that needs to be fixed. And so what Dr. Heather Jordan taught me is that an individual with enthusiasm and openness to the idea of including people with disabilities in research fully makes it all go away, but not easily. And I'll share a little bit with you how this all worked. So, as I said, the NSF has been pushing for this to get forward, to move forward, and it's been accepted. So the work that was created here by Dr. Tomberlin here at Texas A&M, Dr. Jordan at Mississippi State, and I'm not sure who the colleagues are at IUPUI.
Dr. Picard.
Dr. Picard. So I think that trio really have moved the ball forward a great deal. And I don't know if everybody's aware of this, but this is groundbreaking. There is no precedent to this anywhere that I'm aware of. And so that in itself probably needs to be a paper. So we got a chance to actually come to the mothership, right? And got to handle the larvae, the creators of the frass, right? And that was pretty exciting that we were invited here to do that. I think one of our participants really did not want to put their hands in but did so for the sake of the photo. So the research that was done, I'm not going to go into the weeds on the, no pun intended, but on what the research was all about, but in a very simplistic description, they were focusing on how could the frass amend the soil to help the growth of the plants. And they did find a difference. And much like a lot of typical gardening things, is that a little bit of a good thing is good and a lot of a good thing is bad, right? So that's super simplistic. I'm not going to go into any further detail because that's really not the focus of my presentation. But what they were taught by Dr. Jordan and by Dr. Jordan's graduate researchers was all the steps involved in thinking through science. They weren't able to create all the statistics and do all that. They didn't have that background, but they did learn over time how to do the steps of the measurement and the care of all this, and then to think through the later steps that I'll get into. But these three gentlemen are the ones that were involved in this research. Cedric here on the far left of the image, and Tanner on the far right. In the red hat in the back and the blue jacket lab coat is Charles or Garrett. Garrett just graduated with his certificate of completion from our 4-year program, but we'll be continuing on and doing a few weeks of research this summer. We're at some risk of losing Cedric because of finances. His family is dealing with some financial issues, and so we're concerned about losing him to our program altogether. And we're working really hard to try to find funding so that he can continue because his family's undergone some significant concerns unrelated to our program. But they've all done great. And I will tell you that Cedric's already been given an opportunity for a full-time job with benefits because of the gains he's made through this program, of all the skills that he's learned, all the soft skills, to have a job in the labs in the vet school at Mississippi State. And so if we can keep him, he's got a real opportunity for a completely different changed future for himself. And that's partly in thanks to what Dr. Jordan and her researchers have done here. So all along the way, much like all of you do with your research, is you're tracking what's going on. And these student researchers were learning that process too. The measurement, and initially this research found lots of problems. I think the plants died the first go around, and it didn't go well. But failure sometimes is good, right? We learn a lot about ourselves, and we learn a lot about how life works. And so I think that lesson too is really important for these student researchers. And what could you have done this research, Dr. Jordan, without these students? Yes, you could have. But what happens is, because you involve students in research, it builds their retention in school, and it builds so many skills for their later process in life. And especially here, if these students can now tell this story to judges at science fairs and poster fairs, and they can make the story clear and understandable. Just imagine what's happening with your message about trying to move this whole process forward. If any person can explain it to another person, your message is reaching far more people than it did otherwise. We had the opportunity to go to Washington for their first presentation of this research in a judge competition, but we met here with the chief of staff for one of our Mississippi representatives in Washington, Michael Guest, Jordan Downs has been there for a number of years, and we had an amazing experience talking with him. But the students then were able to tell the story in Washington to our representatives. They met with Senator Wicker. Senator Wicker mostly did a photo op with us and kind of nodded his head. I'm not sure he really cared. His staff did though. But our students felt very positive about having that experience meeting with one of their important senators. This was their first presentation. I will tell you that was an eye opener for them. They learned a lot. They handled themselves reasonably well, but they kind of tripped over each other. And so doing things more than once helps us improve. They got some very fair but difficult questions that they had to deal with. They weren't treated as people that were people with special needs. They were treated just like everybody else. And so really the students that were in our programs that were there stood out quite a bit differently than the others, because many of the others were very talented degree-seeking students from a lot of universities that weren't students with intellectual disabilities. And so they were being asked the same level of questions that those people were. Again, I felt like the judges did a great job. But then they came here. This was a second go around. And when they came here, we sat with them and before they did the presentation, we asked, you know, what they were going to say. And we found out that the first person presenting was basically talking through everybody else's presentation. And we stopped them and helped them develop their lanes, but then also helped simplify it so they weren't trying to talk at a level that was above their own heads, but still being able to say the message. And then also to effectively use the visual aid that they had right there. And they did great. It was such an improvement. And again, learning those life skills that can pay off in any job interview or anything else. The opportunity to meet with our shared colleagues here at Texas A&M when we were in Washington was great fun. And Dr. Jordan, I will
appreciation for the work that you did putting this together. And for all of you
that get a chance to visit with Dr. Jordan after this session, please treat her nice today. It's her birthday.
You let the cat out of the bag. Sorry, I'm trying to get back. Is that Mackenzie? Can you see the slide? How do we change it?
You have to exit out. So exit out. Now,
In here?
no, so you just go back in here and go to share,
It's just less like.
click here, share, and then to
almost got through the whole thing.
I'm so sorry.
is that
It's
good?
my technical issues. Can you see it now?
Mackenzie? Okay.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
Well, and this is my last slide, or second last slide. If you have not visited a Buc-ee's and you're here in Texas and you are driving near a Buc-ee's, I encourage you to stop in. This was a highlight of our experience. Thank you very much.
Good. So I mentioned earlier, Miss Anita Lang from the Aggie Achieve program will be presenting as well.
Howdy, everyone. I'm here to present on Aggie Achieve. It is, Achieve stands for Academic Courses in Higher Inclusive Education and Vocational Education. So I'm going to give you more of like the overview of these types of programs. So ours is a twofold mission. They provide inclusive and immersive college education and equip young adults with intellectual disabilities for employment in the community. So the first 2 years of the program are designed to introduce students to college life and academics. The last 2 years heavily focused on independent living and career development, including opportunities for off-campus paid internships in the student's field of interest. So the transition and post-secondary programs for students with intellectual disabilities, or TIPSIT, we are the cohort 3, which is 2020 through 2025. So it exists to expand, equip, elevate, and engage the Aggie Achieve students. So Aggie Achieve is also a comprehensive transition program.
They can't see it.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's true.
Just on the.
Just do this right here.
Left.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Yes.
Got it?
So Aggie Achieve is also designated a comprehensive transition program by the U.S. Department of Education. It is the first in Texas, and students can apply for federal financial aid, including Pell Grants, work study, and federal supplemental education opportunity grants. So for the program eligibility, the students must have completed high school and no longer receiving supports, be between the ages of 18 to 27 at the time of entry, serve as their own legal guardian, have a documented disability diagnosis of intellectual disability or autism, and receive special education services in high school with an IEP. In addition to that, they must have the ability or the ability to communicate, and it's not limited to verbal speech. They must also be able to live independently and take care of their daily functioning. And they must demonstrate at least 3rd grade reading level and comprehension and fluency. So these are just some of our students and their activities on campus. Our students are Aggies first. They are not identified by their disability, but their tenacity to achieve what they can by their immersive experience here on campus. So the first thing that we do from the time of entry into the program, we meet with the student and we get to know like what their interests are, what their goals are, what they want to achieve with their life. And we do this through person-centered planning. So it's very integral for them because it helps us to know like where they want to go in their life and how we can help them achieve those goals. So through person-centered planning, we provide a variety of coursework, internships, extracurricular activities that align with each student's academic interest and employment goals. So the courses are taken for 0 credit, as well as accept the employment internships, and the physical education PAP courses are for credit. They cannot be transferred to another institution, and the students can only take 1 PAP course and 1 academic course per semester. Once finished, they are eligible to once they finish all 4 years, they will receive a certificate in interdisciplinary studies from the School of Education and Human Development. This is just a small sample of some of the courses that our students are able to enroll in. So in addition to their coursework, they also participate in weekly seminars taught by the Aggie Achieve staff. They include independent living, career awareness, financial literacy, and self-advocacy. They also participate in the Hullabaloo first year of their experience here. So these are just some employment sites of some of our students. So employment is very important to this program. The internships offered are through campus and community. So each student completes one semester of on-campus internship, beginning their first year of being enrolled in the program. During the last 2 years, they have the opportunity to venture off campus and work in a setting like more directly aligned with their field of interest. In the final year of the program, they will work closely with the job developer to identify relevant inclusive employment locally or in their hometowns. Our students have access to over 1,000 student organizations on campus. Some of our students are involved in some of these organizations listed here, and they're very, very active on campus. They're probably more busy than some of their peers on campus. So according to the National Center for Science and Engineering Statistics, approximately 3% of STEM workforce are individuals with disabilities. It's with our partnerships with Dr. Tomlin, with AgriLife, with CEIF, that we're trying to increase this. Like, we want our students' voices out there. They can contribute to science. They are scientists as well. So these four actually graduated May 11th, and they participated in the ceremony. They led out all of their peers. And so they actually got to meet the governor. They were recognized in the House and the Senate, May 15th of this year. So Achieve Beyond. Thank y'all and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, our next presenter is Dr. Juan Morales Ramos. He holds the position of research entomologist at the USDA-ARS, National Biological Control Laboratory in Stoneville, Mississippi. During his brief tenure as a researcher, 30 years, Dr. Morales Ramos has done research on mass production of parasitoids and predators and has developed novel methods of in vivo and in vitro rearing, including artificial diets. Dr. Morales Ramos has produced over 90 peer-reviewed publications, 10 book chapters, edited a number of books, obtained 15 patents, and much more. Thank you so much for being here today.
You're welcome.
Presenting. We will need you to stand here so people online can see you.
Thank you for inviting me. And I mean, it's a
Just watch for this cord, but the camera is here,
okay.
and then try to talk all the way to the back of the room.
All right. Yes, the USDA, the ARS has the mission of using research to develop agricultural products to improve food production and to eliminate damage, to reduce damage. But it has been historically reluctant to work in the subject of insects as human food. But this has changed radically in the last 10 years. And this has been evidenced by the approval of this Grand Challenge. The Grand Challenge is a multidisciplinary project that is competitive. We submit these projects to a panel, and then they decide which ones are to pursue. And they usually involve multiple labs, multiple scientists with multiple disciplines on it. And in our Grand Challenge project, the objective is to explore the possibility of utilizing insects to produce diets for animal feed, and in principle. But also, we are interested in seeing the possibility of utilizing byproducts from insect production and doing other products at the same time. So we divided our efforts centering mostly on mass production because we identified that as one of the weak parts of the whole system, the production, the ability to produce enough biomass, insect biomass is one of the challenges. And then at the end, this is the objective to produce biomass for feed formulations in different animals. And we have a component that also focus on the use of for us, the insect waste as a fertilizer, as a potential fertilizer, and also potential use of chitin for other applications. And we are focusing also in human safety and human health and animal health. These are the areas of expertise that we currently have in the project. And we have entomology, we have animal production, different animal scientists, including aquaculturists and crop scientists, dealing with mycotoxins and soil science. And we work together, several labs have participated, have worked together with each other in different projects. These are we have 45 scientists, 12 disciplines, 22 research units, 14 locations, 12 national programs involved in this particular grand challenge. And these are the locations of the labs with more or less the focus on them. And you can see almost the whole country we have missing this area, but hopefully we get more people involved in the future. We have the working groups. This we have insect diseases as one of the working groups, and they are focusing on identifying first pathogens that are pretty much unknown in many of the species, and they are different in each species, different in each population, and then they have different characteristics, different potential threats to colonies, and we have examples already of that have impacted the industry of mostly the house cricket, that have eliminated a lot of companies from even completely. It's been devastating, and there is very little research being done on that in that area. Mycotoxins. This is a very important subject in the USDA. Tons of hundreds of thousands of tons of food are lost yearly due to mycotoxins. Mycotoxins can be so dangerous that the food cannot be used for anything, not even for animal feed, or it is essentially classified as waste, as a hazardous material, and cannot be utilized. The potential of insects to convert these mycotoxins have been demonstrated already in some studies done in other countries, and in some done here in the United States, and that is of great interest for USDA, and there are several labs involved in this, and we are focusing on that possibility and the safety of using these insects afterwards. Food safety. This is happening in this lab and here in College Station. We have people focused on the possibility of diseases being transmitted by insects. Diseases that will affect the poultry mainly, but other animals that could be transmitted by insects, and that have to be addressed in the future. Part of the food safety studies involves, of course, the utilization of insects in animal feed, the direct utilization. We completed a study last year. The data is being processed right now on the use of Tenebri molitor and the house cricket, Achita domesticus, in formulating poultry feeds, and this study has been done during the summer of last year, and we are processing the data at this point. There is another working group. This group of people that they have been focusing on capturing insects, mostly of medical importance, and they were baffled by the quantity, by the amount of biomass captured in these traps. So they start thinking that maybe we should be thinking about how to utilize this biomass. So that's what they are doing. They are improving these traps. They are capturing the insects and finding uses for that biomass. And this is what we are working on in Stoneville, Mississippi, focusing mostly on improving rearing methods, rearing hardware, diets, artificial diet for the insects. We have done studies using self-selection. We put different byproducts of agricultural byproducts mixed with food products. This is mealworms, and this is house crickets. And then we determine the consumption, the ratio of every ingredient that is consumed, and then we estimate the intake of every nutrient using a matrix calculation, and then we utilize that information to be able to formulate diets, and that's what we are doing right now with that. This is the information of the Grand Challenge. These are the contact. And after that, I'm going to give you a little bit more information of what we are doing right now in Stoneville. We are eager to collaborate with industry. The USDA ARS has a program of agreements. It's called cooperative research agreements, cooperative research and development agreements with industry, and it also can include a component on material transfer agreement, material transfer of biomass or products or technology. And we have already some traders working on with different companies, and we hope that in the future we can increase that number, and we can. The main goal of USDA is to transfer all this technology. That is being encouraged from many years. It's not useful. We can produce the best research, but if it's not transferred, it's not utilized, it is just wasted. And one of the processes that USDA has developed is these traders with the industry. This is the biological control, National Biological Control Laboratory in Stoneville, Mississippi. We focus mostly on developing methods of rearing beneficial insects, all kind of beneficial insects. We started working on mealworms as a mean to produce entomopathogenic nematodes for biocontrol. but then we saw the value, the potential on it, and we continue in diversifying as a potential food and feed source. Right now, we are focusing on some methods on the potential of improving the mealworms to produce more biomass. And this is tricky because there are 2 or 3 genetic traits that are basically important in producing biomass. One is the size, development time, but also growth rate, which is different than development time. And all of those 3 traits are quantitative traits that are determined by multiple alleles, and they are highly influenced by environment. They have high plasticity. So everything impacts them. Is from temperature, humidity, nutrition, even the crowding and other things affect those traits. And then it is difficult to, it was not known how much of these traits were actually influenced by genetics. So this was the first thing that we had to do about it. We did this study in which we separate groups of insects in different, according to different levels of development time and size. And then we continue to this next generation and then evaluate that generation and what is the proportion of insects of each size and each development time. And we plotted this and we found some kind of apparent correlation. And in fact, it gave us this correlation, which in fact determined that development time has approximately 64% impact genetic component on it, and size about 44%, which is much less, but is still something that can be subject to selection. And that was the initial thing, the initial step into going into ahead with this study. We are cooperating with this laboratory in Manhattan, Kansas, Dr. Brenda Opper and Morgan Austin, and they are doing genetic studies. They are doing DNA analysis of all of these groups that we are selecting in Stoneville, and we hope that we'll be able to determine the basis of these characters and to help us move this a little bit faster. And this is the study that we recently finished. We had 3 generations of in 4 different levels of these traits, those 4 different combinations of these traits, and we already have evidence that these groups end up being significantly different, but not just in those traits, but also in other traits that we didn't consider, which is fecundity and immature survival, egg viability, and other characters that. So it becomes more complicated. It obviously required more research. We generated more questions than what we answered, as always. But, and that is what we are doing right now. And with that, I finish. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Okay, so our last presenter today, Mr. Aaron Hobbs, I read directly what they write, okay? So he's a native of the great state of Texas. And he's a graduate of Texas A&M University. He's the executive director of the North American Coalition for Insect Agriculture, NASIA, and he's been there since March of 2022. And prior to joining NASIA, he served in numerous capacities, including as president of RISE, a trade association based in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
So that the floor is yours.
Thanks. Well, welcome. It's always nice to be home. And howdy for all of you that are native here. So it is great to be here. And I'm excited to be with you. Thanks for letting me have a few minutes of your time. Yeah, I'm the guy between the panel and the happy hour. So I know that's a precarious place to be. So excited to be with you. I really have just some very simple goals, and that's to reintroduce NASIA. NASIA is a great organization. One of the founders and early leaders happens to be right here with Cheryl. And my experience and what I brought to the organization is different just because I have a different professional experience than Cheryl and Wendy Lou, who was before me. So just to talk about who we are, what we're doing, and then talk about what's going on, where we're going, what our role is, at least here in North America, how we can hopefully be an asset to others, to people outside of the country as well. And again, how we can play more in this global relationship around insects. So let's see if we can do all that. So I'm going to do this stuff really quick, don't worry. But who are we? So our mission, which is probably going to change, but today our mission is to encourage the positive use of farm insects in North America, right? So we are very North American focused. We are starting to have more conversations about the expertise that we're building within our membership and how we can share that with those who are interested in that expertise around the world. Our theme this year, and part of the reason that I'm excited to be at home, but also to be at this meeting, is deepening our culture of collaboration. That's not only within NASIA and among our membership, but with partners like CEIF and all of you in the room. So we're really excited. We're right on theme for the year. We were founded in 2019. Nope, that's backwards. We were founded in 2000. We were founded, that's right. We were officially incorporated, so a legal entity in 2019, but really got our start in 2016 with an event held in Atlanta, Georgia. So who are we? Who is NASIA? So it is not me. NASIA is a trade association. So simply, if you don't know what that is, I work for the membership of the industry. And so I work for our members. We currently have a founding member category that's made up of these 7 companies. And they make a larger financial contribution to the current success of the organization. But our membership is broader than that. So I know you can't read this. I don't expect you to read this. If you can read this, then great, congratulations to your optometrist. But these are all the folks that are currently members of the organization at the corporate level. What you don't see listed are the student members that we have. We have a lot of industry observer members as well. These are the corporate entities that are engaged with our organization today. Importantly, I think it's just good to know, again, who do I work for? Well, I work for all of our members, but this morning we did have a NASIA board meeting. Some of us were here together, the rest were online, and these are my bosses. And so if you don't like something I say, tell me. If you like something I say, tell them. But a great group of leaders that we work for. And again, many of you know this, but this is the group within the membership, elected from the membership, that sets really the direction and priorities for what we're going to do at NASIA. So what are we going to do? These are the priorities for 2023. Some of them are basic, what I call boring trade association priorities. But really, the first one I think is the one that gets the most interest, not only within the membership, but with outside of the industry, outside of the membership as well. But what does that regulatory framework look like in North America? And more importantly, what do we want it to look like? Our first speaker talked about that regulatory framework, how important it is to the growth of the industry. And fortunately, we have the opportunity here in North America to, in some regards, set that framework, to be able to go and ask those questions. Oversimplified, my goal is I want to ask our regulators for what we want before they ask me or tell me what they have in mind, right, for the industry. And so we really had that opportunity. Continuing to grow the association. The association exists solely to serve the industry, right? So it is selfish. If the industry isn't successful, there's no need for NASIA to exist. I don't work just because I like it. I work because we provide value to the membership. One thing, I don't like saying but the facts are there's one employee of NASIA, and it's this guy. So it's me right now doing this work with a lot of volunteer and help from the membership. We are starting to develop an industry library, right? So we have resources, we have information, we have knowledge within the membership that is valuable to other members, but is also valuable to other people outside of the US that are outside of the industry. And we're starting to slowly build that library and again, make what we have available to other people. Of course, the last couple of things are really sort of the boring sort of association things, but again, important for my job, making sure that we're serving our members well, we're growing our membership, and that we're building and formalizing the formal structure of the association. So boring, but those are our priorities, so I have to list them. So where are we? Just a couple of things to highlight, and I might be done early. Just a couple of things to highlight. We have launched a new allied membership category. We just made that official, I think that was last week. And so we're continuing to add people to the membership. We had a lot of folks that said, how can we be engaged with NASIA? How can we learn what you're doing, but also how can we contribute to your efforts? And that was really the driver for creating this category. It gives people a home that don't fit into our traditional membership categories. So we've launched that. We're excited about that. And we continue to welcome new members to the association. So that's insect farmers. That's folks that are using insects in some kind of a product. We do have an industry observer category that are just interested. And then of course, a new allied industry category as well. And then what people care the most about generally is where are we on regulatory? So one thing I forgot to include here, and I'll start there. The big project I got handed on day one was create a best practices document and a best practices guideline for North America. So those of you that might have experience with what's going on in Europe and IFF, they have a best practices guideline. We are great friends. They were kind enough to let me look at that. And for all intents and purposes, I said, all right, I'm going to use this as my first outline for the guideline here in North America. Some of that work started before I got here. My job and what I said I'm still on time for is to get the first draft of that entire guideline to our board this summer by the end of July. And so that is a guideline. It is not a how-to document, how to rear insects, but it's a guideline focused on the regulatory structures in North America. If you are going to farm, if you're going to process, if you're going to make ingredients, what do you need to do that correctly? It's not going to be exhaustive, but it'll certainly be easier than what I've been doing over the last 14 months, which is reading this and referencing over there and then going over here. So it'll put that all in one place. It's also really exciting in that because many of our regs are currently silent about our industry, it helps us have that conversation within the membership. Okay, this is silent. Do we want it to stay silent? Do we want it to say something? What is it? So it's been a guide internally to asking better questions of our regulators as we're formulating that. So that's underway. We did just get a roadmap for regulatory approvals. And we're now in the process of putting ourselves on the map and saying, here's where we are, here's where we go next. Our roadmap includes not only recommendations for so the end goal is all of our uses, we can sell our insect ingredients for all uses for all animals. Okay, that's the end goal. So now we have a map to follow to say, how do we get there, right? It includes recommendations on the order of studies that we should do, because some studies extrapolate to others do not, right? So let's do it in a good order, but also what's the cost? And it'll give us the opportunity to be more both strategic and tactical in how we approach that, doing that work and hopefully give us the opportunity to do some of that as an industry instead of individual companies carrying the full burden for that work. We do have current approvals for BSFL meal and oil in adult dogs. We have dossiers in process within the AFCO process for cats. We have a cricket dossier as well as a mealworm dossier. They're both in process. Now, very early, you haven't seen them. You probably didn't know that if I didn't tell you. I haven't seen all of it, but I have a general idea of where we are. And I'm really excited. So by the end of this year, our roadmap will be filled out, at least within NASIA, to say, this is where we are, this is where we're going, and here are the timelines that we're expecting, right? So then I can, as an example, say to the membership, we need to set it, if we're gonna do this step in the process and we're gonna do it collectively, this is how much it's gonna cost, this is when we need to kick it off, here's where we're gonna get that work done, et cetera. So really excited to be able to, by the end of the year, have on a piece of paper, this is how we're gonna get where we wanna go, and a rough idea about how long it's gonna take us to get there. So. Yeah, that got done early. How to get in touch. So this is how you get in touch. I'm not a social media guy. It's not my nature. But I'm trying to have more engagement with the NASIA page on LinkedIn. So please give us a follow there. We do have a website. A lot of the material there is very basic. A lot of it is for members only. So it's either we are starting a new members only section, but there's some basic information there. Our annual meeting is the one event that is absolutely 100% on the calendar. And it's going to be November 6th in DC. If any of you if you're really thinking ahead, that is aligned with the Entomological Society of America and their annual meeting in the DC area. It's actually in Maryland, but it's in the DC area. So it's just across the river. So we're going to be there. We have an in-person, we'll have an in-person, and it'll be a hybrid meeting, in person and online. There'll be both annual meeting part as well as board meeting parts. And so if you're really nice to me or one of my bosses that I showed you earlier, I'm sure you can join us for the annual meeting portion of our meeting. So with that, I'll give you back some time.
Cool.
And then we're going to take questions, right?
Karen. All right, thank you. We are going to take a few minutes to change the configuration here. For those of you in the room, you might remember I talked to you about this little owl. So we're going to turn this on and it's going to hear anybody and everybody. So if you ask a question out there, I will ask you to stand up so the owl can find you easily. We will also take some questions online and you're going to try to put that up.
Yeah, I was going to try.
So bear with me for a minute. For those who are watching remotely, I'm going to put us on mute while we figure this out. I'm sorry about it, because this is still muted. Okay, let's see. So here we go. Yep.
Yeah.
You can hear me? You can hear us? You can hear all the noise in here? Yeah, let's take some questions.
Okay. So at this time, what we'd like to do is really open the floor to the audience for questions, and I'm going to focus on the audience in front of us. And Cheryl, maybe you could focus on if anything comes up online.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, that sounds good. So really, the floor is open for the next 45 minutes. Are there any questions?
Or 30,
30?
or 30.
Or 30 minutes. Are there any questions from the audience or any of the speakers? This could be 15 minutes. We got a question right here in front. Introduce yourself.
Yeah.
Where you're from.
Yeah.
And
I'll do
then
that. My name is Henrik Vogt. I'm a key account manager for Better Insect Solutions. We are a European-based company supplying end-to-end solutions for everything regarding the live animal, from breeding to rearing and climate systems, feeding systems, and so on. But I have a question. I think it was Dr. Zimmerman who raised the question, and then followed up by you about the two-strain strategy, you could say, for producing for the feed sector going into human feed source and human feed chain through animals. But there's also the other part of it for industrial purposes, as you so finely described. And I'm seeking some kind of vision. How is that going to materialize? Because we are looking, when I'm talking to clients around the world, especially in Southeast Asia, they'll feed anything. And there's no restrictions out there. They have no consideration whether it's good or bad. If they can eat it, they'll feed it. But how do we actually ensure that that will be legal? Because I can see a lot of purposes for industrial products that we are not allowed to produce today because of legislation.
David, would you like to comment?
Okay, I tell you, the one of the things that people have to realize is that different countries have different perspectives, and countries learn from one another. I'll give you an example. GMOs. GMOs basically started in the US and worked a little bit, and we reached some equilibrium. But GMO in the US were attacked by environmental group, by everyone else. But then suddenly, people in India accepted BT cotton. Why they accepted BT cotton is an interesting story. But the moment that it was accepted in India, the relationship in the US changed completely. Because people in the US, because if the Indian accepted and all the crazy environmental groups are accepted and everyone else, at least we allow it in cotton, and then we reach the equilibrium in GMO that is now that basically you can use it for fiber and you can use it for feed, but not for food. Now, obviously, Europe is different because in Europe you have 27 countries, and it's enough that Austria, it's Austria, is against something and everyone else is in trouble. So to me, if you develop in Africa and develop it in Thailand and it's successful and no one dies, then slowly it moves to the rest of the world. So to some extent, when I hear that people using it in Africa, and let's see some of the pictures from Uganda and you see it in the market, then you slowly realize that people will write papers and develop, and this knowledge will move elsewhere. That's number one. So the experience in other countries is really, really crucial because we learn from one another, and some countries are more important than others. As I said before, India is very important. I don't know why, but at least in the US, India has some sort of image of a country that cares about the environment, you know. So that's number one. Some countries really are crucial. Secondly, when you look at other countries, I think it's very important to work with the industry and to develop some sort of procedure that seems reasonable. Aquaculture again is moving from Thailand and China and Ecuador to the rest of the world. So to some extent, it's very, very important to know what's going on, and professional associations that document it and papers that document it are very important. I think that what will happen is that in some developing countries, culturally people will eat whatever they eat. And in the US and Europe, it will be more and more, it will start with pets. I really think that one area that is really important is fish meal, because environmental groups are very worried about the future of fish, and that will be a trade-off. Okay, you accept it for fish meal, and we'll accept it for other things. So this is the thing, you really have to look at all the picture.
What was your question about what we feed the insects or how we use the insects?
Both, because we see these two possibilities, and it's two different ways of thinking. And
So I can share the NASIA perspective and how we are focused right now, right? So from a NASIA perspective, the development that we are focused on is feeding our insects based upon the market that we're trying to go to. So right now, NASIA members' focus is on feeding feed grade ingredients, right? We understand that there is a lot more that insects can do, but today it's establishing and helping a market mature around using feed grade ingredients to feed our insects. But we have members and we have friends that we know are researching other inputs for insects, but that is a future area of focus. Right now, it's maturing and developing the market around the insects eating feed grade ingredients and then having a premium product for either animals, including pets or humans. And that's where our time is being spent today.
Great. Let's take a question from online. So I have a question that doesn't say who this is, who asks, has there been any research on how insects can improve and possibly change the gut health of livestock? Specifically wondering if there's an impact on methane emissions or improved output if added to feed for dairy cows.
That's supposed to be for me.
That's for anyone who wants to take. Yeah. The short answer is yes.
I know that there's actually more research in livestock than companion animals, specifically on methane. I don't know specifically, I would have to look it up. But I don't know, but definitely there is a huge interest in modulation of microbiota, but I don't know the link with methane and with others here. How that. Sorry.
No, I think we may know some people who've done some research with livestock like cattle, but they are not represented here today. And so if you want to follow up, send a message through the CEIF LinkedIn page will help. Anyone else here, or shall we take another online?
Ben in the front.
Ben.
Hi, so I'm Ben. I'm working at Energene, a computational genomics company in Israel. And I like to follow up on that question with regards to third world countries. And there is a recent buzz that I heard from many places where the industry is going into Indonesia and Southeast Asia because of costs of production and because you can do there things you cannot do in the rest of the world. And regulation is one thing, but also cost of production is another thing. And are we going into a way where all the industry is going to be in third world countries that will supply that protein into Western countries? Is it good? Kind of problematic, because I always saw black soldier fly as a solution for different waste streams and not the common things people are trying to use now as chick feed and things that actually work. I believe the answer is genomics, but again, this is a different question. The main question is the things are going to be fixated into third world countries when you can get cheaper labor and better regulatory conditions for actually rising this industry?
I will say that it depends. What is making expensive production of insects is labor. Labor costs are pretty high, and the insects require a lot of labor. Insect production requires at the present moment and the present state of the technology require a lot of labor. But on the other hand, insect production is very susceptible to mechanization. So there is a lot of potential to mechanize a lot of these tasks, these particular tasks. And if it's done correctly, if it's done well, there is a possibility that it can be done in successfully in countries where the labor is pretty high cost.
Okay, it's economics. So to me, there are two elements, three elements that matter. Number one is if you have a situation that you can really make money by getting rid of waste. I know that people develop in the US, someone make a lot of money by taking all the cardboard of Costco and producing some byproduct. So the moment that you are able to identify 2 or 3 waste products that you can make money from doing it, suddenly you make money from the input rather than the output. Number 2, generally the tendency of agriculture because of its nature is to be mechanized and to move to places where there is high mechanization. So to me, the big challenge is to have 1 or 2 success stories that one of the big companies will decide, good, I go into it and I really move from a little small scale operation to something bigger. I agree completely with this, that this will be, if the industry has a chance, some of the multinational will take it over, work with their engineers and reduce the cost of production immensely and develop. And the trick is to combine the waste product with some final product so you really have a cheap supply chain. But in the meantime, maybe in Indonesia or some other countries, people will learn what's going on. Again, I think the key element to spread the knowledge out, because the way that things happen in this world is you have a crisis, suddenly there is a shortage of protein or is a big waste problem, and you say, look, there's the solution. Think about it. Biofuel entered in 2 years, suddenly we have 0 biofuel in the US to about 10% of our energy source. So developing the knowledge, developing the goodwill, so you don't really have enemies that stop you, and trying to identify the right combination will let this industry rise. I don't think it will be linear, it will be a jump, like any other industry.
We have 2 more. Yes, Maria and then Aaron.
I think in the meantime, there is also potential to explore, for example, production in countries where the cost is higher. So for example, in pet food, there is a premiumization when that ingredient is made in US because there is fear of lower quality, less quality control of those ingredients that are produced in countries that maybe regulatory affairs is not as high or as strict as US or European Union. So I think in the meantime, there's also a way of absorbing some of the extra cost and changing that and putting that towards quality and safety and acceptance of a population that is expecting a higher quality product and safer.
So my simple answer to your question is no. But again, I'm the executive director of the North American Coalition. So what I'm seeing is from the members that we have, their expansion is it's right on schedule and it's really exciting. There's a big opening next week of one of our North American members with one of the most technologically advanced facilities that we have in North America. There was another one within the last 6 months. You know, ADM partnered with one of our members here in North America, you know, the biggest, I mean, ADM, we eat something from them probably every meal, every day. And they have made an investment as a feedstock supplier and a relationship partner with one of our companies. So, you know, and then we have companies with, you know, 70, 80 years of experience growing insects that are also not just serving the markets that I've been speaking about as far as ingredients, but have been providing insects domestically and globally for, again, a lot longer than I've been alive. So I think you'll see that expansion in those countries, but I'm very confident about the growth of the market here in North America.
Let's take a question from online. This is sort of a 2-parter from Arvil Gonzalez, and this is about USAID. Can you be more specific on how you think black soldier fly farming could be incorporated into USAID activities, including some of the larger Feed the Future activities? And then there is a follow-up asking if traditional USAID implementing partners have been receptive to incorporating black soldier fly farming.
Short answer is, I think it's incredibly complicated for some of the new initiatives. Some of the reception that we've gotten with the grant proposals that we put in has been a lot of excitement, but also some hesitation to put in a huge amount of money. the one example that we had in Nigeria, it also spun off to additional funding for Malawi. But there were some financial situations there that didn't allow that to move forward. And so some of those larger programs, BSF can become a part of that, right? It's a larger economic initiative. The work that we were doing in Malawi with Mopata was one part. And we just have a draft of a white paper on the economic analysis that is part of this larger transformation initiative. And so the larger USAID funding mechanisms, I think, see the potential, have some reservations about funding major work, but perhaps in the future. What was the follow-up?
How it's being accepted by traditional partners.
That it is, as we get more information and showing some success stories like we're doing in Uganda. That gets back to USAID. I made a trip to Washington to pitch this idea to USAID, and they were immediately receptive to the idea.
Okay.
But the series of success stories, I think, is going to be the key to getting additional funding and bigger funding, and probably corporate partners along the way and other NGO partners.
And I'm just going to tag on because this relates to what you mentioned about Nigeria. Somebody asked, they would like to know if there are findings for industrial black soldier fly larvae producers in Nigeria.
I think there are. Jen would be better to answer that, to be honest. She's been leading that effort, but she's not here. I think there are. I know that we've gotten emails and inquiries about larger businesses and working with them, but I'm not sure where that's at.
Okay.
We have a member of our audience from Nigeria that's here learning about black soldier flying right now. So
excellent.
Confidence, could you hold your hand up? So maybe at some point during the break, if you have questions about that, you can engage.
Find each other. How about another question here in the room?
We got one in the front.
Oh.
No, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm just curious if you had to combat any issues with heat, because when I was sampling, my flies seem to not really like that. So I'm wondering, how do you combat it, and if you had to? Yes.
Yes, in Uganda, when I was visiting, they were actually challenged with that, and if it was getting above a certain degree, they were having collapses. And so they were trying to figure out easier, affordable ways to ventilate, to reduce the heat in their facilities. And we're still experimenting with it. So yeah, there were some challenges there that if you saw what Deborah put together 3 years ago, it was a very, very different system compared to what they have now. And I suspect they'll move into new technology and new approaches as they learn. And that's the really, I think, interesting part about that partnership and what USAID has been funding is research associated with just the production of BSF and what local resources are best to answer some of those questions. And so they're moving forward.
I can also give you an answer. In mealworms, what we experience is that mealworms in high density can produce a lot of metabolic heat. So if you have your temperature control at some point, your tray where you have your mealworm is going to be like 5 to 10 degrees higher. Depending on the density. So the density is one of the ways to probably control. We experimented with with different ways to cool it, and we deem it practical. We use pressure air, we use water, we use ice. We have a circulation system. Things like that. Very complicated. No.
Okay.
It's close to happy hour.
We use some air pressure. There's a way to cool the air with our compressor with air pressure, and it turned out that It requires a very large compressor to pull a very small area of insects, so it's not practical really. The best way to do it is to control the density, the tray design and things like that.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Castillo first.
Yeah, my name is Elena Castillo Perez, and I'm a professor here at A&M, biological and agri-engineer. I am a food engineer by trade. So I love dogs and cats and fish and mice and milk. But I really believe this is the alternative source for protein for human foods. And I don't hear much about it. And I'm interested in what can we do from the technology viewpoint, the processing, safety stage. What can we do I'm very excited about Ruli's work, of course, in bioplastic. But what can we do to make sure we have a functional protein that is made efficiently and safe? I mean, I'm here to hear how can people like me help you to develop sustainable human foods for the people. Any challenges? Is it homophobia the challenge? Is it people are not interested in that? Or any?
I have an opinion. Thankfully, that's what I get paid for. We partnered with one of our members, Aspire, to do a market research study around the acceptance of insects as food. When did that come out? That was last year, yeah.
They shared it at Insects to Feed the World, didn't they? Or even before,
Yeah,
no,
even before
the
that.
Nasia meeting
It
before
was
that.
before me, right? Okay, so it's been at least 14 months. And you know, it's from my perspective, it's more of an acceptance issue than a regulatory challenge, right? Strangely enough, there are more regulatory hurdles around animal food than there are around human food. We have new members regularly joining the association that are selling direct to consumer food products using insects as an ingredient or sometimes as the ingredient altogether. You know, their issue isn't regulatory, it's demand driven. And that's really what I'm seeing right now. You know, and so again, the reason that we're talking, that we are focused on, like Nasia is focused on pets and animals, is because that's where we know the demand exists, right? And it's just making sure we have all the regulatory things lined up. So, you know, I just met a new friend last week who, you know, has a cricket shop out in California, and she has a great brand of products. Her issue isn't supply, her issue isn't regulatory, it's demand, right? It's people wanting to take that step. So.
Thank you. I'll add to that, I think we need to start smaller and trying, I think it's the same idea of moms trying to blend vegetables and sneak in on other types of food. I feel that if we go from not eating insects to now let's put a plate full of larvae, exactly, I'm not gonna jump on that wagon. But I think if you think about maybe meals that you like, flour, let's put in a more human terminology in here and maybe incorporate in small amounts. And I think there's a huge amount of research that needs to be done in terms of sensorial, organoleptic characteristics of those products. So what are you trading in every time that you're, you know, substituting something? But just a fun fact, 2 weeks ago, my uncle was in Italy and he sent me a photo of this pizza place that uses cricket flour for pizza. And there were some that were very excited about, and then there were some that was like, I'll never stop here again. And so I think it's a way of starting that conversation. And I also feel that there are some insects that are more friendly, I guess, to our palate. I would eat a cricket before I would eat a roach, before I would eat a silkworm. Maybe it's just me, but I think there is maybe a natural transition to be thinking on that area. But I think technology will help along the way, because we can also think like we do with pulses and other more traditional ingredients. We can also think about separating those different nutrients. So rather than talking about the insect as a whole, we can talk about the protein, we can talk about the fiber. Just learned that somebody here may be able to give me some chitin. So I'm dreaming about this for a little while. And so just thinking about how to use and maybe partition and how to optimize their use, I think is another way of viewing that industry.
I think too, we've seen some work on sort of the functional aspect. I know you talked about functional ingredients. What does the chitin or the chitosan do in the microbiome? So it's not just how does it taste, is it healthy, but also what are the other health benefits? And before I step away, if you've ever seen a toddler given the choice between a dish of dried mealworms and a dish of potato chips, they will eat the dried mealworms like potato chips because nobody's told them yet that they shouldn't eat that.
I think that the rule number one in marketing or any economic, it doesn't matter what the representative population. If you have enough buyer for your product, sell it. The only product you need to know is the potential buyer. The thing that I think is very important is to have some sort of study about what insects are being eaten in America and who eats them. Once then you know how you can tell it. And the other thing is to try to look at the insect as part as an element of a food item rather than combined by itself. But to me, I think having a study about who eats what and at what content, it's not only what the nutrition content, but what do people eat, then you realize that there is maybe 80 million people in America that eat different type of insects, and then you can identify different markets and go from there.
One question.
Well, maybe one more here that might be brief and then one more live. I have a question here, it's sort of two questions. What test should we perform to see the food safety of insects not to be toxic to offer to human and pet? And then this person, Mohammed, would like to know where to get more information.
Oh gosh, on testing?
Testing for food safety.
Right, so I don't know, if anyone have comfortable discussing testing? I don't know if our panels.
I think, Aaron, you talked about the AFCO process for animals. There are dossiers that are submitted that speak to safety, I would say.
Yep.
And under the FDA, anybody who's raising insects that are intended to be food are considered food, and they have to follow the Food Safety Modernization Act, and they have to have good manufacturing practices.
Right.
And in terms of more information, I'd say join NASIA. If you want more research, join CEIF.
Just to add to that, to pets
Yes.
and humans, we also always look for just like crude outcomes. So for example, one of the things that we do is a series of blood markers, right? And saying, are you changing serum parameters to see if there is any sign of toxicity, complete blood counts. And there is a variety of things that can be done. And so, and there are protocols for that, specifically for AFCO, you have to feed animals for at least 6 months and do longitudinal assessment. And so there is different guidelines to be done. But I think that safety is just one aspect. But I don't think the market's going to increase just by saying that it's safe. I think now we get the foot at the door, but you really need to add value to that because otherwise you're not going to move that,
One more, Tiffany, I think you have a question.
Hi, I'm Tiffany Alexander. I'm a associate professor at the University of Houston, but I also represent Health Corporation based out in South Korea. So our major ingredient is Teleprenebrio mealworms. So my first question goes to Dr. Woolley about bioplastic, because we have been in discussion about using mealworm to develop bioplastic. Now, with your experiments, I think the things that you have presented is based on the black soldier flies. Would you say that a lot of your experiments is applicable also for the mealworms as well in terms of the mechanism, or is it hard to say without actually experimenting with the mealworms?
I could say in general, it should be applicable, but it's going to be, what is the composition of the organism and breaking that down into parts. So like I said, one can isolate protein, probably from mealworms, you're going to work more with protein. We chose to isolate the chitin from the black soldier flies because it's a relatively high abundant component. And so you can pick and choose what you take out of the insect.
So when you are looking at the industry, do you see your research outcomes sort of scaling up anytime soon, or do you see more like a long time future type of thing? Because I'm trying to gauge the business feasibility of that plastic. How would you say that, like, if you were to look at the future of the bioplastic using insects?
Yeah, well, again, with the financial conflict of interest, I hope that it takes off very quickly. But the economics are difficult because the bioplastics are always more expensive than petrochemically sourced plastic materials. It's so cheap to take oil out of the ground and get ethylene or styrene and make polyethylene or polystyrene. So we're always more expensive, so there has to be some benefit to it.
But one thing about the new remold about the mealworms is that they molt many times during the life cycle. They can have up to 22 install 22 molds, and they do tend to consume these molds when they are left in there. They mix up with the food that they consume it, and they show up later in the fracs because there is no fully digestible. And some people have been able to isolate chitin from the fracs, from the mealworm fracs. So that will be possibly a very good source of very large amount of it, because they produce a lot of fracs.
One more question?
If you don't mind. So our business problem might be applicable for a lot of the international business entities here. So Korea is a small country, so we have a lot of demands where we have a hard time scaling up because of the land resources constraints. So we have been looking for ways to enter the United States. So we have been in contact with about 25 states, trying to navigate a location for our factory building and all that. Biggest problem that came out from that conversation is they don't know how to zone this business. And so our CEO does not want to be categorized as agriculture business, only because now that opens the door for the factory to be right next to the swine farm. And that's not the business model. And recruiting the investors, locating right next to the swine farm doesn't do any good because they want to be positioned as the agri-biotech industry. So, but then the regional development offices, economic development office opportunities and those business offices that they don't know how to categorize the business that we're particularly in. So that have been creating a lot of frustrations and dropping the balls and communication, wasting a lot of billable times. So I wonder whether your organization has any discussion and sort of helping foreign entities sort of coming in, creating jobs for the Americans. Like, is there any sort of plans or anything like that for helping out those businesses? So that's my last question.
Sure. Short answer is no. But I'm happy to talk to you over a beverage. And we have a handful of companies that have been established outside of the US who have then since established locations here that we could connect you with that would probably be good resources for that.
I'll add to that. I think in terms of networking with some of the companies here, I can think of one in particular that had some issues in terms of how they were classified that could talk about the pros and cons of the different types of classifications you look for and what that will cost you, even in terms of your municipalities, taxes and things like that. Great.
So we're gonna pause and take everything to bar.
So we're gonna say goodbye to our friends online. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will post a recording.
But before we